Meeting, welcome, is being live streamed. The login information can be found on the district website, and it also is being recorded and will be made possible as soon as it is possible, and can be found on the district website as well. The meeting is now called to order. It is February 2nd, 2022, and the time is 6:37 p.m. Our mission is to provide a safe and caring climate and culture in which we engage, inspire, educate, prepare, and empower all learners in partnership with their surrounding community to be successful in today's and tomorrow's society. Les, can you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And then can you please call roll?
Scott Andreasen.
Here.
Al Dahlgren.
Here.
Zach Dorhold. Here. Les Green is here. Shannon Hawes.
Here.
Natalie Ringsmuth.
Here.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Here.
Following cabinet members and staff are present at the District Administration Office: Superintendent Willie Jett, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education, Dr. Lori Putnam, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education, Dr. Mike Rivard, Executive Director of Learning and Teaching, Lori Posch, Executive Director of Operations, Gary Ganji, Executive Director of Student Services, Special Education, Carol Potter, Media Technicians, Paul Novak, and Gordy Scott. The following cabinet members and staff are virtually present: Director of Community Engagement and Communications, Tammy DeLand; Director of Equity, Ian Omar; Executive Director of Community Education, Adam Holm; Executive Director of Finance and Business Services, Amy Scalarud; Executive Director of Human Resources and Labor Relations, Tracy Flynn Bowe; Executive Director of Research, Assessment, and Enrollment, Donna Roper; Executive Assistant, Jan McGuire.
Thank you. Next, I'm looking for a motion to approve tonight's Board of Education agenda and the work session agenda.
So move. Second.
I have a motion by Scott and a second by Al. Les, can you please call roll?
Monica Segura Schwartz,
Yes.
Natalie Ringsmuth,
Yes.
Shannon Hawes.
Yes.
Les Green is yes. Zach Dorhold. Al Dahlgren.
Yes.
Scott Andreasen.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Next up is the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of non-controversial items that the board adopts routinely without debate. Any single member may remove an item from the consent agenda by requesting removal at the time the consent agenda is moved for adoption. On tonight's consent agenda, item A, approval of personnel staff changes. Item B, approval of monthly treasurer's report for December. Item C, approval of monthly financial report for December. Item D, call for bids, district network equipment. Item E, request for proposals, audit services. Does any board member wish to remove an item from the consent agenda? Okay, then I'm looking for a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda.
So move. Second.
Okay, a motion by Scott and a second by Al. Les, can you please call roll?
Al Dahlgren.
Yes.
Zach Dorhold. Les Green is yes. Shannon Hawes.
Yes.
Natalie Ringsmuth.
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Yes.
Scott Andreasen.
Yes.
Okay. Then moving on to reports, we're moving right into the Board of Education Standing Committee reports. Achievement, Integration, Equity Committee, no January meeting, so no report, correct. Board Development, Policy and Governance, Monica Segura Schwartz.
We met this month. We look at the policies that are going to be reviewed today for first reading in our work session. And we also look for a number of policies that were included and forward to every board member that have no changes, which are not part of the agenda right now, but they were sent about a week before to the board members. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Board Finance and Audit Committee,
No report?
okay. Legislative Committee,
Just like to announce that, so State Representative Dan authored a bill to address the special education cross subsidy, to do that legislative action. And there's going to be a town hall, virtual town hall tomorrow at 6 p.m. I'll send out the link to this, it's open to the public. And it's going to be with the Speaker of the House. Just would encourage people to maybe log in, show up, and show their support for this bill, which our district is intimately familiar with.
so if people from the community wanted to join in, how could,
So if you, it's a very long link, but it's house.ledge.state.mn.us, and you can go to the page for State Representative Dan Wolgamott, and it is under legislative updates. And the link to join the meeting is there on that page.
okay, Al?
And I do have a question. Is this an interactive session? And if more than 3 board members attended, would we have a violation of open meetings laws? Do we need to pick 3, or do we have time to notice 3 days? So it would be, no, we don't. Oh, no, we
Okay, so we
don't.
can't notice.
So we'd have to pick 3. We can't have more than 3 attend, so I guess if, we should probably decide that at this point. If there are 3 people that are planning to attend that meeting, then let it be known. And if there's more than 3, we'll have to figure it out.
Monica?
No, I just didn't hear the answer. Is it interactive?
So it's a virtual town hall. So, I mean, he'd have it here, say, at a public library or something, but because of COVID restrictions and accessibility, it'd be online.
There's a chance that board members could be speaking, correct? Is that the,
Correct.
and I
So
think
yes,
we
it
need to
would
be mindful,
Yeah.
that would make it mindful of the 3 people.
Maybe Tracy would know the answer to this, but Tracy, on a meeting like that, if there's more than 3, if there's only 3 board members who speak, but there are others who are watching, would that still be in violation, or is it simply no more than 3 can attend a virtual meeting, period?
The 3-person rule would be the safe rule, right? There could be an objection if there were more than 3 board members present.
Okay, so let's go safe. Then I guess then looking to kind of decide here where people planning on joining, because we don't want to have 4 people log in.
I would like to join, but I have a meeting at the same time, so
Okay.
I'm out.
Was anybody else planning to attend? How long will the meeting go, do you think?
Just scheduled for 90 minutes.
Will you be there then, Zach?
I planned to be online for that meeting, yes.
Okay,
And it's just not board, I'm just encouraging any community members who are supportive of this.
yes, yeah, I hope that we get some. So Zach will be the first one, and I don't want to step on anybody's toes, so. Nope, okay.
Either way.
Okay. Scott, Dr. Green,
I kind of think Al should be.
yeah,
Second.
you give your speech.
I don't know, well, I will, but I don't want to step on any toes or take anybody's
Yeah.
spot if they want to either, so.
Yeah, we would love for you to,
I won't be attending, so
okay.
that's 2 people for sure.
Yeah, I think it's consensus here, Al, that you've got a great story to tell that's very polished and explaining it, that we would love if you represented.
Maybe Willie would like to try it. Oh, yeah, you're not a board member.
He- Oh. Okay,
Monica, is your, what's your position?
My position with respect to if I'm going or if you're going.
You want to?
I would like to be there, but I'm not sure if I want to be able to log at that time. But I still, I agree with the rest of the board that wants to nominate you to go to be there. So I won't take your spot. I'll talk to Scott about it.
Well, I can be third or you can be third, it doesn't matter.
okay, so we're going to go with Zach and Al, and then Scott and Monica, one of you. You guys will decide, is that good?
What time is it at again?
6 PM.
I think, as committee-wise goes, this is in the wheelhouse of legislative committee. So since I can't be there, you're on the legislative committee, Monica? You're on legislative committee? No. Who else is? Oh,
both
sorry,
on
Shannon.
finance.
Yeah,
Okay, then never mind about that.
that's fine.
Both on finance.
Okay, so are we good to move on then? Zach?
Zach, are you going to send a link?
Okay, thank you. And that's great news. And then Personnel Negotiations Committee, Dr. Green?
I have no report. No report.
Okay.
Wait till next time.
Okay. He'll recap next time. Okay, and then we have future agenda items. February regular board meeting topics include school presentation, Lincoln Elementary School and Talahi Community School, Local Education Activities Foundation LEAF report, American Indian Education update, and Parent Advisory Committee compliance documentation, approval of the 2022-2023 school calendar, and policy readings. Normally, I say Board of Education members may suggest items or topics for future board meeting agendas to the Board Development Policy and Governance Committee. There's been some discussion recently as to exactly how do we go about suggesting and how do board members go about suggesting items and getting them on the agenda. And so I wanted to create this time that I announce future agenda items as an opportunity if anybody would want to suggest an item for a future agenda that is not on our, thank you, Natalie, because you told me one and I was hoping you would jump in here. I don't know if it's the same one or not. And I want to be mindful that we're not discussing the topic itself, but just to put it out there and that we would kind of give nods or yays or nays or something if you want to do that. So Natalie has items she would like to suggest. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two items. One
Oh,
is
okay.
one that we've talked about for the years that I've been here, but we just haven't ever really made a decision. Or we did make a decision, but I'd like to bring it back up again about student liaisons to the board from our high schools. And just to bring that topic up again. The second thing I would like to bring up is the policy dealing with head coverings, but specifically talking about do-rags and head covers and allowing that in policy. I did just send an email to the board with some research from ACLU and talking specifically about what they had said to a school who was dealing with this same issue. So I'd like to look at that policy again specifically this time to do with do-rags and head covers.
Okay, so we have two proposals here, again, being mindful that we're not getting into the weeds of the discussion of the topic itself. The student liaison, we have talked about that before. I don't know if all board members had participated in that, but what I'm looking at is board members, are you interested in that being a future agenda item? And that we would bounce that to board development and I think give them information as to what we were looking for, I think. But again, mindful not to discuss the topic itself, but do you have interest in having that being brought forth as an agenda topic? Monica?
I suggest to be an agenda topic at the retreat.
do we have, okay. And is the retreat full? Do you want to take something off and move something? I want to give respect to all of the administration who has worked hard to create presentations, so I don't,
I can discuss it in our committee.
That time it's March, so.
okay.
So, sorry, so my suggestion is that we think about bringing it up to the retreat and that we discuss the agenda for the retreat at the governance committee. Is that agreeable to you all?
Before we get there, anybody else want to chime in?
Yeah, I was to the MCBA conference, and there was a couple of good topics there. One was,
Can you, I just want to be careful that we're not discussing the, okay,
I'm suggesting a topic.
okay. Oh. Can we, I'm getting a yes or a no on student liaisons on the board. Do you want to discuss it at a future, do you want it as a future agenda item?
Sure.
I have no issue with it being a future agenda item.
Okay, so, anybody else? So we have, yes, are you all agreeing that yes, you would like to have that be a future agenda item? Okay, then Monica, jump back to you, and I'm a little bit nervous about moving the changing retreat items, adding, changing. I'm not sure what you're proposing, but does administration want to jump in here? Sorry.
May I respond?
Yeah. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I'm suggesting that, but I'm suggesting that we take that at the committee. The committee has administration presence, and they will give us, so we can discuss how that can work, unless you want an answer from the administration right now. I'm not opposing to that, but that's why I was thinking we can have a proposition. I mean, isn't the process of these topics to go to our committee anyway, and that we kind of have a recommendation for the board about how and when we bring them back?
I don't want to speak for administration, but if I was administration and I was tasked with 2 months ago preparing items for the board retreat, and then all of a sudden I got something swapped on me, but that's my 2 cents.
My response to that is, first and foremost, we are at the will of the board. So whatever the board would like for us to do, we will be prepared for it. Are we prepared for the 3 agenda topics that we had discussed earlier? Yes. Okay. If all of a sudden we would like to add or swap, as I'm thinking about it at this moment, the 3 topics that we prepared for, we've talked about going in depth with them. Okay, so that's why it was a board retreat. And so to swap one out, then where do you put it? And are you saying now bring that to a board meeting like this? Well, remember, the rationale was to go in depth with it. If we would like to extend the retreat and add a 4th topic or cross one off, again, we are at the will of the board, and we will be prepared to do whatever the board would like. And when I say that, there's no malice in that, there's no ill intent in that. Bottom line is the administrative staff has skills. And so whatever you ask us to do, we'll be ready for it.
Al?
My preference would be to do it at a future work session. Retreat is simply a long work session. I don't think it would make a difference.
I would say a work session as well. Anybody else want to chime in?
That's fine.
Okay, okay, moving on. Natalie's suggestion, policy of head coverings. I feel like we sort of, we were going to have, during the next 6 months, this was going to be researched, investigated. Yeah, and then brought back up in July,
Yes.
correct? So I think we are already To me, we were handling that,
I
but
think that is.
Monica?
Well, I think that we could look at the notes for the last meeting, but I do think that that is incorrect. I don't think that the motion that we had last meeting had any timeline or anything. I don't think that anybody brought up a motion, if I am not mistaken. So the way that I am recollecting this, we brought the policy to review. It was reviewed, it was voted on, the changes were voted down, so the policy stands as it was. And it won't come back in the agenda unless somebody calls it to the agenda or in the next cycle.
I was thinking we were going to have an agenda item in July.
Yeah, there was an agreement that we would bring it back midsummer.
Dr. Green?
I think I don't have the exact wording, I can find it, but the assumption is that that is going to be reconsidered in July for the 22-23 school year.
So Natalie, I think we're already headed, it was already on the table.
Yeah, that's not good enough for me. That's why I'm bringing this up. So I'm sorry, I had COVID, so I could not be here with y'all. Last time I did watch online, but, we were talking so broadly about hats and hoods and everything, right? And we're going to strike that whole section out. And so
So-
this is just a different, this is a different situation than the broad situation that we were going to look at. This
Okay.
is specifically because of discriminatory reasons.
Okay, so your proposal is to bring it back earlier than July. Then I'm looking for board answers. Do you want it back? Do you want it back earlier than July? Do you want it back in July? Please.
July.
Do you want to?
I need to jump in before the conversation keeps going, if you don't mind.
Please.
So in my individual board meeting or board member meetings with you, one of the things I discussed was the process as it relates to this policy and in terms of a learning moment, a teachable moment, a moment where young people, and I know there's people in the audience that are adults that advocate, and there's people that have sent us emails and things of that nature. But the one thing that you're on the school board for is about a kid, okay, about a young person. And so the one thing that this board has always, what I've always learned from this board, is student voice. And so the one thing I explained in the individual meetings was the process that the administration at each high school, at each secondary school, was going through to speak with their students so that their students would have a chance to have I want to use the word interactive, or a chance to be able to express themselves, a chance to be able to advocate for self as it relates to this entire topic. Don't have a date on that yet in terms of when that's actually going to take place, but I can tell you it's not going to take place in July. It's not going to take place in June. That is something that's going to take place during this month of February. And then with that, the plan was to be able to have this moment with the board, okay? And so when you talk about placing this as a future agenda item, I'm here to tell you that the students, the board doesn't have to, I know the board has to approve it, but we've worked it out. We've had conversation with young people. We've had a conversation with the administration, with staff in the buildings, so that this does come before the board so that it can be discussed. So I just need to make sure that that's out there. It's not something that we were looking to do in June or July because it is something that people were passionate about. And so I see that happening before, the end of the term trimester, March 4th, before spring break. So, because we have a meeting, in 2 weeks? And then we have another one 2 weeks after that. And so we're trying to give the administration and the kids enough time to be able to formulate what they're trying to say.
Thank you for that recap and for everybody working on that. Are we comfortable then letting that process work out for now?
I love the fact of the student voice being brought in. I really was happy about what happened at our schools and what we're seeing our kids root for. So I'm totally 100% fine with letting the student to board process, work itself out, and then go on from there with whatever would happen next.
As an administration, that is one of the things that I thought I understood from the board, to make sure that, because when I say it's student voice, there's student voice, but there's also staff voice in that. And so I just want to make sure that I'm being correct with that. And so we're trying to give the administration, the sites and things of that nature, the proper vehicle to be able to have this discussion and have input.
Okay,
I think specifically, the last thing I'll say is it's the difference between a discriminatory act with a cultural item and hats and hoods.
okay.
So that's my issue.
Anybody else want to suggest agenda item?
Yeah, I do, but Willie, your plan is to bring back for the whole policy, correct? By that time frame, so you're talking about in like a month, that you would bring something back to us? And that would come with an administrative recommendation?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Scott, did you have an agenda item? And I know Al has one too.
Yeah, I went to the MSBA conference, and there was a couple of really interesting items, I thought, that perhaps Tracy could speak on at some point in time. One is evaluating jobs, equality versus equity. How do you compare different jobs to get, well, maybe it's a point system for different parts of different jobs, and eventually it comes down to pay. And I think Tracy's probably very familiar with that. It's something that can be used in negotiations. It would be an interesting item for the board to look at. Second one that Tracy might be able to take a look at would be the legal status of transgenders. There was a long presentation with a lot of legal information that hopefully has been passed on to her, and she could talk about that in a work session also. About it.
I think Tracy has touched on that topic, that it was presented, and maybe that is already in an annual, am I correct? Rotation? Okay. Yep. Is that correct, Tracy? I don't know if she could hear you.
It's not part of an annual presentation. We have talked about it before in relationship to Board Policy 413 and other related policies. I think also the Student Services team at times has done some discussion about their efforts to support our transgender students.
And the, as for Tracy, with the evaluating job equity in comparison to salaries and stuff, that seems to be also incorporated in some of your reports or contract negotiations, or when we have wages and.
Yes, we reviewed that at the start of negotiations for board members, as we have a system that's been in place for, I think, a long time, probably 40 years since the pay equity statutes went into effect in Minnesota. But we have a banding and grading system that assigns those points and equities across all of our job positions. And that information then gets summarized in a pay equity report to the state of Minnesota every 3 years. And we, have to pass that report, which we've passed each time they've done it under my tenure.
So it somewhat exists already, but does anybody want this as a separate agenda item or to come back sooner than it exists right now? Is my
I
question.
would like to see it as a workshop item.
Workshop, okay. And then you guys can chime in. Do you want to add this to a workshop item, or are you fine with how it exists right now? My personal 2 cents would be, Scott, that if you want more details in that you could reach out to Tracy. I've kind of sprinkled in my understanding of both of those items in her previous reports. That's just my 2 cents. Anybody else want to jump in? Okay, so yes or no, do you want that at those two topics as a future agenda item? Monica?
So I don't have a yes or no answer for that question specifically. So I actually, can I ask a point of order question?
Yeah.
So the way that I understood our role as the governance committee in the agenda, and I actually had a question about that brought by the administration to you, I think, about how we put the agenda items in the agenda for the board, is that we in our governance committee will look at the agenda items to propose them. And I understood that these topics will go to our committee to be having a recommendation for. So I am a little confused about the process that we're doing right now, because it seems like, I'm sure you're putting the topics in the agenda and you're giving the recommendation exactly where they should go.
Yeah, I'm not telling you where they should go. I'm just, and you can, and certainly we can do it that way if you want to. So the committee can come with a recommendation if you want us to do it that way. I think it bounced back. I was confused because it was bouncing back to me. And so then I thought, well, you can certainly announce it here if you want, and we can discuss it. But previously, it read that you may suggest it to Board Development Policy and Governance Committee. But then when my understanding was you guys were, I don't want it, out of concern that, that I think this will explain it. Out of concern, if a board member suggests an agenda item to the Board Development Committee, and the committee isn't recommending bringing it forward, that's not fair to the board member who wants that item that it's getting shut down, because the development committee is not a majority. There's only 3 people. So in the past, it's caused a problem because a board member wants an item brought to the agenda. The board development, 3 people shut it down, and so it never comes to an agenda item. Does that make sense? So then I thought, okay, well, this is fair. Then if somebody has a topic, instead of it getting shut down at board development, we can bring it here. But I'm open for suggestions. I thought you were tasking me with this, to say,
Me?
yes, board development, yeah. They're
So-
questioning that you didn't like how it was here.
No, but, so what we asked the administration after our last meeting, and maybe I kept that part of that report when I was doing my report, so I apologize for that. But we asked we were confused about this item in the agenda, because the agenda said us Board Development Committee for it, but we also have an agenda committee, an agenda committee that meets to discuss the agenda. So the question that we had for the administration to bring to you was about, why does it say there in the meeting that the topics need to be brought up to the board development if we still have an agenda committee? The explanation that I got from the administration about it is that the agenda committee just looks at the order, and it's a quick meeting, and they don't look at the topics, but that the topics are set for a cycle and they're reviewed by our committee, the governance committee. That's the explanation that I got. And I can tell you that in my history since last year that I have been the chair of this committee and part of this committee, I have never received a suggestion from any board member about a specific topic. We have not done that. And we also have not reviewed the cycle of the agenda items. So because of that, we were asking that question, and I was planning on putting in the agenda of our committee to review what is in the cycle. So that's the story of that question. I don't have a lot of history of the board to know if this procedure has been there in any difference, But that's why I was confused, and that's why I was asking this.
This is kind of going long because we've never done this before, so people have been sitting on agenda items, but Dr. Green?
Historically, at least from my time on the board, it's, I think Monica's correct, that we never, board members really never knew what they were supposed to do with agenda items.
Yes.
And this is the first time that kind of a discussion has occurred. I think there's some significant information that has been provided here. And so it might be useful to take all of those items that people have suggested, to give it to the committee, and then the committee ought to figure out, and I'm not saying, well, I guess I am saying you should figure out a way so that you can say, we've looked at these agenda items, and these we're bringing forward, and these we aren't because, and then, or talk, and do something with that. But I think to send it back to the committee makes sense, but.
Okay, and then, Al, do you want to explain where that goes wrong?
Well, Les, I would say that there is no committee of the 7 or 6 committees that we have, there's no committee that has veto power over what comes to the board. The board gets to decide what comes to the board, and that's 7 members, and we don't have a 7-member committee except for this right here. And so this has been reviewed. It was reviewed back, I think you were on the board when it was, and that's when it was Jerry Van Korf and Bruce Mose, and back in those days, and the future agenda items was, and the reason it was, you can bring up an item if you'd like to have it placed on future agenda items. It would get placed on there, and once somebody, if a board member said, I would like to have this on a future agenda, it would get placed into that item. So now you'd have this list of proposed items, and that never went away, that item never went away until it was part of an agenda. And so nobody gets shut out of being able to bring forward an item. And for example, Natalie's item that she'd like to have with the school liaisons on the school board. If you have 3 members on the board development committee that aren't in favor of that, they can just say, no, we're not bringing that forward, and that's not fair to Natalie. But if Natalie can propose that in this session, so Natalie says, I'd like to have school liaison or school board liaison as a agenda topic, then that goes on to the list that Shannon's reading at every meeting. It doesn't guarantee that it's going to come forward, but it never gets forgotten.
Dr. Green?
The point I made is that I was trying to make was that the committee should say, this is coming to the agenda for these reasons, or it's not coming to the agenda, that there should be some response. Because I remember the list, and I don't know how the list, who decided which was a good thing to pull off the list. So if the committee has that list and they can at least articulate, because we've had that issue of student liaison around for 10, 12 years. So, because I remember talking about that years ago. So some way for board members to submit something and then get a response saying it'll be on such and such agenda, or we're considering it.
Monica?
So I was bringing up when Scott bring the topics that he just mentioned, and you're asking me right now, yes or nay. I have a lot of questions to Scott about those specific topics, about what is the presentation exactly about, more or less how do we do that. That's why I was thinking maybe we should be discussing this in the committee, and maybe we should have, I could have a conversation to Scott, or Scott is part of that committee, but if he wouldn't be part of that committee, I could just bring his more elaborated discourse about what he wants to the committee. That's why I thought about that. Also, in addition to that, I do think that the committee should say what Les Green is suggesting. What in the case that the 3 of the committee don't want to bring one item to the agenda, which is kind of the same that you're doing here. If 3 of us don't want to bring an item to the agenda, what happens is that this should become a motion in the board, and any board member can make a motion at any time, and then we vote on it, and then it is part of the agenda or not. So the parliamentary procedure just give us the possibility to add items to the agenda. We could be making an item, putting an item into the agenda at the meeting, at the moment of the agenda. We could say right now that we wanted to discuss it right now.
Well, yeah, which would sort of be dangerous because we would need to be, why we don't do that or respond to community input is because we want to be prepared and thorough in our agenda items. Again, I am open to whatever process. I just want to be careful to give the example of Natalie, is that if Natalie wants to discuss student liaison and there are 3 personalities on board development, that gets shut down. And it would never be brought forward.
But it won't. And now it could still make a motion that gets voted here that directs us or the administration to prepare the item for another time. So it's not like you only can have the choice to make a motion to discuss the item right now. So that's what the ability of the board is, and that's what I mean about it. But I'll be quiet, sorry.
The purpose of the list is to show. So that's the purpose of the list, is to give people an opportunity to put that on the list so that we have time to develop and plan for when we want to have it. And you can, if I say that I want to put an item on the agenda or on an agenda, and it goes onto that list, I still have the opportunity to take it off. If you know, Scott, if I take your, the one about positions and stuff, if people come to you and start asking questions, what are you trying to get out of this? What's the purpose of the board learning about this? Do we not have procedures in place? You may see that it isn't something that should be a topic at an agenda, and something that the board isn't going to have any action on anyway. So you may say, I want to remove that from there, but you can do that. Les couldn't remove it for you. So that's how I've always understood that piece.
There was once a time when people shut you down on getting
There
an
is,
agenda
yes.
item, and somehow or other you managed to work around it.
No, it was through changing this process and getting the items listed.
I've never seen the list.
Well, there was a list.
Yeah, it was before
And
my
my
time
items
too.
were on the list for a couple of years
So
forward.
we're working towards a better process here, but I'm not quite sure. Natalie, please jump in, what that process is.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think this is great that we're talking about it, and thank you, Monica, for the governance committee working on this as well. I think I love the idea that we're able to suggest items in the regular meeting. I also love the idea that that would then go to the governance committee for more clarification, because we
Absolutely.
don't want to do this work here in a public meeting like this. I know we're just testing it out to see what we're doing. And then, you know, for instance, Scott's issue, I had the same issue when I was newer on the board and I didn't understand some financial stuff. And I said, can we do this at a board meeting? And then some administrators said, well, why don't you just meet with Amy? And then Amy enlightened me to all things in a half an hour or less. So it didn't have to come to the board. There's a process like that that could bring it to committee, but we still all feel like we're able to suggest things. And if there's a reason to not, it would have to be a good reason. Like, I feel like what we were doing first was scary. Like, I would be scared to bring stuff up because then people were like, do you want it? Do you want it? You know, like, that's not really a conducive way, I think, to do the meeting together. But suggesting it, going to governance committee, and then going from there, I think would be a good idea. Not to vote, but just for clarification, and then to work with the agenda committee that way.
Al?
So as for my item that I was going to bring up, it's already on the agenda and has been committed to, and that's the masking policy, the masking, what do you want to call it, rule. We were supposed to review it at each trimester and halfway through each trimester. And to date, we haven't had another review since we voted on it. The board's had no input. It's only been, we've been told what it's going to be for the next semi-trimester. And I think it's time for it to come back up again and at least let the board members express their views one way or another. It was supposed to come back to us, I thought, with information comparing our district to districts who were not masking. I think the first time it came back halfway through the first trimester, some of that information was provided, but it was very vague, and some of the districts hadn't provided information yet, so we didn't have it. We've got almost a full year of data now, and I think that it should come back to the board for a discussion. And I think it should happen prior to the end of the trimester so that it's for the next trimester and not after the beginning of the next trimester. So that would be at the next meeting.
Monica, do you have your hand up? No. Okay, so I am not sure what you guys would summarize this as. We have a couple proposals for topics, and where are we giving nods here? Are we bouncing them to board development and they're bringing a recommendation? I'm Les, please.
I think that it should go to Monica's committee, and she can come back with a recommendation about how best to do this. I think
Yep.
that makes the most sense, rather than I wouldn't want to do it right here, because that's not the procedure. So send it
Okay.
back to their committee and let them
Okay.
come up with a decent recommendation on how to make this work.
So thank you, everybody, for this last half hour of the time, maybe longer, but it was it was something that needed to happen. And again, the end result is going to be much better. How many years have we sat on this board and said, I don't understand how to get an agenda item on the agenda? And we all went to our first agenda planning meeting and said, well, that's not what I thought it was about. So we're working towards a process that I think has never existed in any of our times before that was to the liking of any board member. So thank you. Monica?
So thank you. I'll bring that back to our committee. The only concern that I have is with Al's suggestions, because he wants it for next meeting, and I don't think that we even meeting before the next meeting. So I just wanted to make that a point and maybe just get it back to Al. I don't know if you want to make a motion right now.
No, that one is already on the agenda. It's supposed to come back to us every trimester, for each trimester, so. And it's been up to the administration as to where to place it. I'm requesting that the administration take a look at that.
Okay. All right. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it very, very much. So that adjourns our regular board meeting. It is 7:24 PM, and we are opening up our Board of Education work session. And first up is Special Education Update, presented tonight by Carol Potter, Executive Director of Student Services, Special Education, and Beth Watkins, Director of Special Education Curriculum and Instruction. Welcome, and thanks for your patience.
No audience now. Perfect. Okay. Okay, should we wait for Willie to step back? Do you want to wait for Willie, or should?
I think you're fine.
Okay, wonderful. He has seen this presentation already. So, good evening, Chair Haas. And I was going to say Superintendent Jett, but we can skip that. School board members, and I was hoping that the families would still be here as well, but maybe they're watching us online. So tonight we are sharing information about our special education programming across the district. And as you are aware, there are many considerations and complexities to serving kids with special needs. We divided this presentation into 3 sections. So our first section is learning together. Our second section is going the distance together. And the third section is looking forward together. We included the suggestions from the board agenda planning meeting that we had earlier, and hope you enjoy this slightly longer presentation as much as we have enjoyed creating it. I love this first slide because everything that we do in special education gives kids the opportunity to access their core and their specialized instruction. The pictures in this slide, the very large one at the top left, this is the cast of The Lion King for South Junior High that they presented in the fall. They performed in the fall. The bottom picture in the middle, the young woman with the plaid, the white checkered shirt on, her name is Kayla Anderson. And Kayla Anderson is one of our paraeducators at Tech High School during the day. And after school, she works for Arise. And Arise is a program that assists students with special needs so that they can participate in all of our core activities that we have going on in schools. And then on the far right, you will see teacher Kristen Maddock, who is the South Choir and Theater teacher. And so just a little bit about this great celebration on this slide is that the student that she is hugging, Kristen Maddock on the right, she's blind. And so the student tried out for the show in the fall, and she tried out just like everybody else. She achieved a part in the play. And I was so curious about knowing more about how this worked. And so I contacted Kristen Maddock and said, you know, how did this all work on a stage? You could fall off a stage. And so she shared with me how they worked to keep all the choreography for this student, her name is Katra, to the back side of the stage. And they connected her with students throughout the show so that she could follow someone else as she went through the process of all the different music steps and the choreography. It was just so fascinating. Kayla's job, working with Katra, was to teach her the choreography in the background. So as the whole group practiced the choreography, Kayla was with Katra to learn the choreography. And then her job during the productions was to be off stage. And when Katra came off stage, she helped her align her costumes so that she could just switch right into the next costume and help her get back on stage at the right time. The story is just fascinating. It's just one really great example of the teamwork that we have across the district in serving all kids. The cards at your table tonight, you may have noticed some cards with, there's Braille on it. Your name is in Braille. And our teachers of our students who are visually impaired made those cards along with their students who are visually impaired as well. And so you can practice, there's a little information in the plastic folder too on how Braille is read. And the keychain in there is actually for, it's called White Cane Day. And when the keychain hangs down, it's a white cane that students use to guide them. So very fun, just a little something for you and from Katra and our teachers of the blind and visually impaired. Okay, I'm going to take you back to the beginning of how a student qualifies for special education. Students go through a process called our multi-tiered system of support before they're even assessed for special education. And so students that are identified in their classroom as needing additional support are referred to the building multi-tiered system of support team. Every single building in the district has this team. What the team does is they create an intervention for the student, whether it be an academic intervention, a behavioral intervention, maybe there's something social emotional that we can do in the school too. So they create an intervention, and then that intervention takes place, for approximately about 6 to 8 weeks, and we reassess again. That team reassesses to say, was this intervention successful for this student? Sometimes the interventions are not successful, and then the team makes the determination that maybe an assessment or an evaluation for special education is something that the student needs. If the parent consents to that, then we move forward and we complete an in-depth evaluation on the student to really assess what their very specific individual needs are. After that evaluation is completed, we then write what is called an individual educational program, the IEP, for each student. And this is what, we do this annually. And so this is what drives their programming. It's goal-driven. And this is what is set for all the teachers in the school to help the student succeed. Okay, a little data. Our child count trends over time. This slide is 20 years worth of child count. Every December 1st, and MDE picks that date for us, we count the number of students who have an active IEP and have an evaluation plan that has been completed within the last 3 years. So as you can see, we have a gradual trend increasing in the number of students that qualify for special education. Last year, we took a little dip down in distance learning, and then this year, December 1st, 2021, we came back up again a little bit. So our trend is moving back up again. So we're gradually increasing. We gained back about 50% of what we had lost last year. Of those 2,583 students that are receiving special education services that we counted on December 1st, these are the different categories that the students are serviced in across the district. And this has remained consistent for us over the last several years. The size of the pie, these pieces haven't changed a whole lot for us, maybe a few percentage points, but not a whole lot. Our largest category is the specific learning disability. That's either in math, reading, or written language in that area. And then our next largest category, two largest categories, developmental delay. That is the category of students from birth to age 7, so our early childhood numbers when kids are identified. And then our next category is emotional behavior disorders as well. A trend that we are noticing over the last, again, 5 or 6 years is a trend of students that are what we call dual identified. So our multilingual learners also have some type of a disability, and so we call them dual identified. And so the increase, all the numbers that you see up and through the year 2021, those are all year-end data. And then the very last one from 21, 22, that data is through December. Well, just an awareness, that's half a year. The 301, that's half a year right now. Okay, our federal settings for special education. I know I've talked I have talked about this before to you, but I'll just give you a quick review. So our kids can be served in 8 different settings. The first 3 settings, setting 1, setting 2, and setting 3, is where 94% of our kids are served, and that's in our general education sites. And that's exactly where we want them to be, with their peers. In settings 4 through 8, about 6% of our kids are served in those settings, and those are our alternative sites as listed. This is always an interesting slide. Our special education students by building. On this slide, it's all our general education sites. And so the blue line indicates the number of students who qualify for special education at that site. And the green line is our October 1st enrollment count for that site. So you can see by school each percentage of students that are served in special education at each site. Okay. This slide then represents the number of students that are currently at, and again, it's a point in time. It could change tomorrow, but at our alternative sites across the district. Okay. Okay, a little bit about our licensed staff trends. We've heard a lot about staffing this school year. And I'm happy to say that our licensed staffing has stayed pretty consistent over the last 5 years. We haven't had much change. We are seeing a little bit more challenging to hire in some of these very specific areas like school psychologists, speech language pathologists, OT and PT. We're sitting fine in the OT PT category, but they are very difficult to find. We have districts around us that are always asking for additional support that we can't give up because we don't have enough to share. But the other two, school psychs and speech language pathologists, those are challenging positions to fill. Okay, and then our non-licensed staff trends. This also has been a consistent topic for us this year as well, because we've had to be very creative about how we support kids not being able to hire as many staff as we like. We seem to be able to get adults in to interview, and so far this year we've interviewed about 70 non-licensed staff. We've hired about 31 of those staff members have accepted positions. And then we have, as quickly as we get them in, sometimes we have a lot of movement in the district. We just have a lot of opportunities for people. And so we may have initially hired them as a paraeducator, and then they might, if they have a 4-year degree, they might move into a behavioral resource specialist, or they might move into maybe a dean role, something else that we have in the district that also supports them. And so, yes, we are seeing a decline in our number of paraeducators, but we are being very creative in how we support our students and our teachers throughout the school day. In the next slide, I'll share a little bit about that with you. So knowing that we were going to have a tough time finding non-licensed staff, what we did is we took some of that FTE and we changed it into positions that could support our teachers in order for our teachers to support our students at a higher rate. And so some of those positions, the first one is a due process coach. So the due process coach supports teachers with paperwork requirements, focusing on about 75 probationary licensed staff. So we have a lot of Tier 1 and Tier 2 teachers as well this year. And so the due process coaches, there's 2 of them, and they are doing a great job across the district of supporting teachers and how to complete the due process requirements. We've also supplied our paraeducators with an hour in the morning as we have a shortage of the non-licensed staff. And then in addition, if we have staff that are ill that day, that creates a lot of trouble for us through the system. And so we have decided we're going to pay one person, it's typically a DCD teacher in the school, to organize that schedule each morning. So they come in early and they work out that schedule, and we pay them for an hour of their service to figure that out each day, because it can be a challenge if there are several people gone in a day. Also, we have also hired permanent guest teachers. And so those permanent guest teachers cover staff shortages and staffing for teachers to hold IEP team meetings throughout the day, which has been really nice. Those folks are really flexible, and we've trained them to go to any site across the district. And so they can pick up and go not only from school to school, but hour to hour as we host staffing days. And they have been amazing for us this year. We also hired a recovery specialist, and Beth is going to talk a little bit about our recovery process in just a few slides here. And so our recovery specialist helped us organize all of the pieces and collected the data around our recovery pieces that we needed to put in place this fall. And like I said, Beth will tell us more about that in a little bit. And then our speech language pathology assistants, as I alluded to earlier, those positions are difficult to find, the licensed speech language pathologists. And so we have hired some assistants, and those assistants can see kids, can work with kids. They can't complete an official evaluation on a student, nor can they write a progress report for a student, but they can do all of the treatment phases of seeing a student during the day, and they have been really beneficial to us as well. We also hired special education clerical staff at our elementary schools. We had clerical at our secondary schools, but we added them to our elementary schools, and these folks support our teachers in setting up IEP meetings. And so a teacher doesn't need to spend their time on the phone trying to get a hold of a parent or emailing parents several times to set a meeting up or a conversation up. The special education clerical staff take care of all that, and they do a lot of paper shuffling for us too throughout. Then we also, the last position I want to share with you is a supervisor support. And we needed more supervisor support on the ground this fall, just by the sheer nature of the needs of the kids coming back this fall. And so we moved Jack Peterson, who was a supervisor, our PBIS SEL. In December, I said, Jack, I think we're going to need you out in the field, buddy. And he did not hesitate. He said, yep, I'm on it. And he picked up a few schools for us, and it has been really, really nice to spread out all the work in the schools. Okay, our next slide, we were talking about non-licensed staff. Our next slide is a beautiful video of a dedicated Discovery paraeducator who shares her experience with distance learning and then what it was like coming back with kids to in-person learning.
For some of our students, I've seen a lot of growth. They're maturing. They're having to be more independent at home because they're not with someone 24/7. They used to be with us all day and then home with parents at night. And last year, there were parents weren't able to be with their students. They had to work. We've seen growth in areas that normally we don't teach. They just pick up naturally, getting their own outside stuff on, making sure they're bringing things with them, going to lockers independently. A lot of this stuff is happening 6 months, a year sooner than it normally would just because they were more independent when they were at home. Before COVID, I worked normally in a classroom helping one student, two, or if they were doing well, helping everyone. When COVID started, the pairs were in the Google Meets. We were doing pull-out interventions with students. We were very involved. So I got used to working a lot online with kids. And now when we're coming back, the Google and the Seesaw we're keeping, but I think that the in-person part was really missing. We're still getting the core academics in and working on random things while we're going for walks or sitting in quiet areas. The work is still getting done, just in unusual places. One of the most rewarding parts of working, especially with the younger kids, is when they reach a milestone. It's probably a year, 2 years after peers, but when you see them reach that milestone, whether it's putting their own shoes on or writing their name, so then you're excited to see how soon they are going to reach the next one.
Reaching those milestones and finding the next one is what we have been all about forever, but it's been a real emphasis in the last 2 years. And I'm glad to be able to talk to you about how we manage distance learning for students with IEPs and how we're working on the recovery process as we've returned to in-person. This is something we're all quite familiar now with, was the unprecedented times that we landed in March of 2020, when according to the governor's executive orders, we all went to learn at home and all of our students went into distance learning. I say that those were unprecedented times, but that was the only unprecedented time because that set the precedence for what we did from there on out over and over again over the last 2 years. Because what we did in special education was meet with families, connect with the students' goals, figure out where they were at, and figure out how we were going to keep making progress by writing new individual distance learning plans for each child for that spring session that we had. And as we moved into summer, we still weren't really sure what the next year would look like. So we got back to it again and connected again with families and wrote some more great IEPs that considered the 3 different ways students might learn. If a student is learning in distance, if a student was learning traditional in person, and if a student was learning in hybrid, how are we going to continue to address their goals and give them the services that they had had before the pandemic and as they were moving in and out of learning models? And so we met with families and had family consent for plans moving forward that we then implemented last year as we moved in and out of those different scenarios that we're all really familiar with. And then summer came and the executive orders ended, and we were very glad to return to in-person learning. And at the same time, the legislature began to consider and address the impact of the pandemic on learning for kids with IEPs and kids with disabilities. And from that came something that we call House File 2, where the legislature passed some guidance for us on how to connect with families yet again and address again how they had fared during the pandemic, how students had made progress on their goals, and what we needed to do to help fill in any gaps. And so the star on your screen is where we are now, in meeting with families again and creating new plans again and looking toward how we're helping kids moving past those last 2 years and into the future. We had some real advantages during distance and hybrid learning in the 2020-2021 school year. One of them was that we were really able to prioritize in-person attendance for those little people all across the board, but also on the chart that Carol showed you with the blue and then the green on the end, those green programs were able to prioritize in-person learning, and most of them were in person 4 days a week all year, which really helped them working toward their individual goals. Like every other student, students with IEPs and students with disabilities had one-to-one devices. Families had hotspots as needed, and our kids really learned a lot about technology. They really dug into the same platforms that their peers were using, and the expectation was that Seesaw and Schoology were their friends too, and they learned to use those well. You heard Denise sort of allude to the ways that non-licensed stepped in to support that. Many times a non-licensed staff would call up a group of students one by one before a session began, get them logged in and in place so that when learning began and the teacher logged in, everyone was ready to go. And then continue to meet with students at other times to help support their learning. So our non-licensed staff really beefed up their skills as well and met the needs in those ways. We learned that we could do remote delivery of some related services such as speech services, and we have scenarios where that is still happening for us and still the case. And so some things we can keep continuing and growing from. We did some driveway drops. Our staff got really good at that. You see the picture here is not a driveway. It happens to be the entrance of an apartment. For some pretty good reasons, this young man had a brand new set of wheels. And so the physical therapist and an interpreter stopped by to help him with some maneuvers, making sure he had some skills and some safety with his new device. We also made driveway drops for things like learning materials for kids who needed hands-on learning, adjusting equipment for students that might be growing and their equipment needed to be adjusted to accommodate their growth, just providing some support and encouragement and dropping off such things as incentives and classroom prizes. So our staff had a good time seeing people from a distance that way too. One thing that really got to be very popular was online IEP meetings as a necessity, and that's really continued. An emphasis for our secondary students in the past 2 or 3 years has been to really put them at the forefront in running their own meetings and talking about their goals and progress. And this gave them a new platform over PowerPoint, just like we're doing right now, to create presentations and talk to their families and teachers about their goals and their progress toward them and set new goals. You probably wondered what it looks like to teach a special education course online. This is the computer screenshot of one of our high school teachers teaching a life skills course. Before this course, she had made one of those famous driveway drops and dropped off the ingredients that students needed for this particular cooking lesson. And on the split screen on the left side, you can see what she was showing the students. So here are the supplies you need. Here are the ingredients that you have. And on the right side, if you're eyesight's really good and you don't need all the bifocals that all of us do, you'll see all of the different students showing off their homemade quesadillas back to their teacher. 2 teachers in that classroom and 5 students helping with that life skills lesson, and certainly, by the way, support at home during that lesson as well. So again, I'll refer back to the legislation that happened in the summer of 2021, which seems a long time ago, but was really not that long ago. And the work that we've been doing in the interim. So the legislation did state that districts must address the impact of disruptions to in-person learning on a student's ability to access their free and appropriate public education related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of the pieces of that legislation were that by December 1, every family needed to be invited to a meeting to talk about the students' progress during the pandemic and potential need for recovery. And that we were to provide recovery services in a variety of formats, either additional support that students might add to their day, if we wanted to extend the calendar before or after school or into the summer, if we needed to compensate for something that they had on their IEP but then was dropped at some point, and then any other creative ideas that teams could come up with to meet individual needs of kids. There's a provision of how we would document and report back to the state of how those recovery services were provided. And then there was a whole list of things that we needed to consider. And Carol talked about the recovery specialist that we've put in place this year, who has really helped us pull these pieces of data. We started back in the 1920 school year when kids first came to school in the fall. What was their goal then? Were they making progress? Was it a rigorous goal for them? And then when we moved into distance learning, did that goal change? Was there less rigor? Was something dropped? And then moving into the next year, how were they able to move in and out of the various learning models? Did they make progress, not just on those individual goals on their IEPs, but did they make progress in the rest of their classes? What was their impact of any disruptions they had? So this included a lot of attendance data as well. We looked at 54,000 different goal points to look at progress or potential progress for students. And then we also just looked at what other factors might exist. Was there a family factor? Was there a situation? Was there a new disability that cropped up? Was there anything that was new for that student that we needed to consider? So these have all been data points that our special education teachers, if you hear special education teachers talk about paperwork, this is some of it. The data points that they were working on just since school started this year. In the bottom right-hand corner of this picture, if you look closely, you'll see a student named Lance. And Lance is running his own IEP meeting in the Tiger Den at Tech on the screen opposite the room, from him in the room with his parent and his case manager and some staff in the room. And every time we're meeting this year with families, we're talking about recovery. Along with annual IEP goals, we're talking about the effects of learning from the pandemic and how the student is progressing. We will keep doing that all year as kids complete services, and also because we know this year still isn't just quite at baseline yet. We have students who are moving in and out of remote learning because of quarantine and those kinds of things, so we continue to ask families how that's going and what students are needing. We did determine to put some of our recovery services in the summer for a couple of reasons. If we start to add them to a student's school day, it keeps them from doing some of the other important things that they need to do in core instruction and having time to be involved in activities. And because of staffing reasons, we decided to add 3 recovery camps in the summer. Right now we have about 250 students who are signed up to participate in those green weeks that you see. The blue weeks are summer programs we always run for students who qualify. And these camps are emphasis in literacy, math, and then the related services, work experience, speech, DAPE goals, any kids who need some progress in those kinds of goals related to recovery. We intend for that number to grow as the school year wraps up and more kids are identified and more meetings are held. Just because we like paperwork, We, we went looking for a product that would help us ease paperwork a little bit for our staff, and we began to implement a new due process platform last spring before we knew about recovery, of course. It ended up being good timing because our previous provider then sunsetted their product, and so we're able to bring in a great product in good timing. We have some learning and growing pains as we're putting it into practice, but the organizational benefits for us is that the majority of the state uses this product, and certainly all of our neighboring districts do. So as kids move in and out, it is much easier by a click of a button to have access to their complete records and to share those easily from districts. That makes it easier for staff to get their job done and for less of that initial paperwork for them as kids move in. Some benefits for family is that we have some easily translated templates of our documents for families both in Somali and Hmong and Spanish. That's 3 things. And also progress reports can be visually depicted with graphs and things showing how kids are making progress. Along the way, we've really had to help our teachers and staff out with these new expectations around recovery and the new paperwork platform. So this summer we did training on the new platform for staff. We took time on Wednesdays where staff has professional learning time to really talk about due process, good paperwork, good goal setting, and using that within the new platform. We're offering the support from the due process coaches that Carol mentioned. Every time there's conferences, they're offering support. They've logged 64 hours during conferences to date. They are also elbow to elbow and side to side with teachers during their prep times as requested and needed in buildings to help ease that paperwork as well. We're getting videos out there. All of our teachers participate in New Teacher Academy. We give them content that's really specific to their various roles as special educators in their various areas of licensure. PD time is hard to come by, but we've had non-licensed to be able to, on a few of those cold weather days, do some extra professional development there, as well as them learning our new system so that they can help us recoup some of our funds through third-party billing for the great services that they provide for students.
Okay, looking forward together then. One of the tasks that I've asked my leadership team to do this spring is to research minimally five other school districts to ask the simple questions of how do you provide DAPE services? How do you provide occupational therapy and physical therapy? What does that look like? And so teams, our supervisors and directors that supervise these itinerant teams have asked the simple questions, how do we do things differently? Do we need to do things differently? Can we be more effective and more efficient in the work that we do? And so this is the perfect time. As we are struggling to get non-licensed staff in place, we need to look at how we provide all of these services and make sure that we are as effective as we possibly can be. As part of our future plans, our new Katherine Johnson Education Center. We're really excited about this. And this cute gal on this picture, her name is Marvelous. And Marvelous is one of our in-step students, and she is going to be at the new Katherine Johnson Education Center. Our in-step 18 to 21 program will be housed at Katherine Johnson, as well as our 2 programs that are currently at our Roosevelt Education Center, which is our K-5 EBD Level 4 program and our high school program, 9 through 12 EBD. And then currently at Katherine Johnson, our middle school, our 6 through 8 is there right now, and they are working around the construction that's taking place in one of the wings, and shortly they're going to be moving to the back of the building so that the construction folks can complete the front of the building. And you probably saw the article in the St. Cloud Times at the end of last week, which was nice, talking about the different aspects in the space of Katherine Johnson. One of our pieces that we love to talk about all the time is the opportunity for our kids to participate in activities after school. Our adaptive sports teams have been extremely successful over the last few years. They play year-round, 3 different sports year-round, and Mike Bakken heads that up. He's one of our adaptive Phi-Ed teachers, and he has a couple of other adults that help him coach the teams, and they participate in the state tournament almost each season, which is really, really fun. And then in the fall, you heard Lori Posch talk about this. We have a new partnership coming up in the fall. It's called Unified PE. So it's a physical education class with our typical students in it and students that would typically participate in adaptive Phi-Ed. And they'll be participating together to learn different physical activities, which is fantastic.
We're really glad as the year has come that we have been able to keep building our instructional resources. It's really important to keep our kids in core instruction to the greatest extent possible. Sometimes students have needs that require the specialized instruction at another level, and we keep trying to build up that resources for teachers. These are some we've put in place in the last year at different grade levels. Relevant novels. Reading Mastery Transformations is a curriculum for our elementary people and Read to Achieve for high school kids. In reading, we've built some math pieces in place at K through 5 and 6 through 8. The PAYS Lab is a really great innovative piece that we're going to showcase for you at the end of this presentation. Middle school is working on some of those soft skills around studying. And all throughout K through 12, we're talking about those social skills and building up curriculum pieces there. At the middle level, there's a pilot working on executive function skills for those students, all those skills for initiating and planning and carrying through, and those pieces that become a bigger ask for kids as they move into secondary. And our 9th through 12th graders have worked specifically on the skills that students need related to their own transition goals, which is what do I hope to do after high school regarding employment and education? What do I hope to do as far as community living and participation? What kind of home living can I have and work to attain? And then what are the other soft skills that I need to be effective in the workplace? And this new transition course came in place this year, and it was really a partnership on all sides of town for them to share resources, set goals for each week of study, and the students to have an integrated experience on both sides of town as they build those skills. We want to end today talking to you about where we're really all headed, which is where we're looking forward to those kids having great skills to take out into the world with them. At all of our secondary sites, we are implementing PAYS labs. This is a form of specialized instruction in CTE for kids with disabilities. We'll let them tell the story for you from Apollo High School.
So what the PAYS stands for, it's PAES, Practical Assessment Exploration System. And really what it is a simulated work environment. So students have the opportunity to come in, kind of explore interest areas, find out their strengths. So the students will do tasks that are kind of ranked by difficulty. So there's kind of 5 different areas that the PAYS lab looks at, which are processing and production, construction, service, and technology. So there are around those 5 areas that students advance through. The PAYS Lab is set up for students with disabilities, and so we have the opportunity to work with students with a wide range of disabilities, ranging from students with significant cognitive disabilities all the way across to students with autism spectrum disorder, as well as emotional behavioral disorders. And that's kind of why it's leveled out, so that we can really meet students where they're at and help them grow to their fullest potential. We have students access the PAYS Lab. It's built into their schedules. So for some students, they come down with our work experience teacher, who's a special education teacher, really really focusing on these skills. We are incredibly fortunate to have the PAYS Lab to be able to have our students get to practice and have this simulated work environment. This is really something, it makes me proud to work in St. Cloud schools, that we have this opportunity for our students to help get them ready for what comes after high school.
When people ask me what PAYS is, it's real world skills every single day. It's for students who aren't quite ready for independent work life and maybe don't know what they want to get into, their likes and interests are, but then they find out, I really like this, or I'm really good at this, and that can kind of guide us to push them into some independent work world outside of the school day. Whether they know what skills they have or interests that they have when they're 25 and what job they're going to be in, they might be doing that like here. They might be sorting money, they might be cooking, they might be building bookshelves. There's just this plethora of like skills and jobs for them to be doing that you would never get to just sit in a classroom and learn about. It gives them the opportunity to say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he can say, I don't know, but I'm learning a whole lot of skills to try to figure that out. The PAYS Lab gives them the independence and them the power. It's driven by the student. So, Jeremiah, you and I get to spend time in the PAYS Lab every day. Do you think that the PAYS Lab is a lot like a real job outside of school?
Yeah,
Do you think you'd be ready for that?
yeah,
Why?
because I'm working hard and I think it's gonna be more challenging out in the world, but this is like getting me ready.
So there's 300 like different jobs in this lab. What are some of the 80 jobs that you've gotten to practice?
Sewing,
Yeah.
calculating, money, sewing, cooking, stirring, measuring.
How about level 1 puzzles? You learned that you were really, really good at that. So then what did we do?
So fast I kept going on and on and on, and then at the end of the time, I almost did all of them.
Yeah, you were at level like 4 or level 5 already. We did level 1 woodworking a couple days ago. What did we do?
Cut the wood. I did it with a saw, and then I cut it and measured it and lined it up, and then I cut it, and now I'm going to make a shelf out of it, a wall shelf.
Yep, it's so cool. I think that's going to be awesome. What's fun about the sewing machine? What part of the sewing machine kind of feels like you're 16 and independent? What is your foot doing the whole time?
Stepping on the gas.
Stepping on the gas, like you're doing what? Car. That's awesome. And what do you hope we get to do?
Real cooking.
Some real cooking. What are you going to make?
Probably cookies.
You're going to make some cookies, and will we get to eat them?
For everyone, yeah.
Oh, we're making cookies for everybody. I love that. I think as we're trying to put more students out into the work world to support our community to be at those jobs, we do need to give them the skills. We need to prepare them. And if we can be sending out lots and lots of kids who have lots of skills ready for the work world, our community is going to benefit.
742 together.
742 together.
742 together.
Do you have any questions for us?
Anybody have any questions or comments? Monica?
I do have a lot of questions. So, what EBD stands for?
Emotional behavior disorder.
All right. So my first question is about when you were talking about IEPs and you were talking about this, you had the graphic of the schools and then how many kids are in IEPs or how many kids you serve. I was wondering about if you could explain a little bit more how you serve different type of kids. If you have some sort of because a kid that is not verbal and has developmental disabilities is not going to be the same as a kid that may be in a wheelchair but has all developmental disabilities abilities. So that and it takes different type of approach. So how, I don't want to say classify, but I really haven't been able to come up with a better word. How did you look at different types of kids, and how can we see that? Because there are a lot of kids that are in IEPs that to the blind eye, you won't notice that they have an IP. And I also, there are very many parents, and we had this discussion before with English learner kids that were displaced in IPs and have been treated with IPs when what they needed to have is learning English or so those type of things. So I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that variety.
Sure, I'll
Did I get a
start, and
question
then
there?
Beth, you can chime in if I miss anything. So I'll just start at the beginning and say that every student that we work with is very unique. And so even though they might be categorized in the very same category, so let's say there's two kids that are both on the autism spectrum. Both kids can look very differently, but they're both serviced in that category. And so upon evaluation, we look at each student, and that evaluation determines what their needs are and how they'll be serviced. And in that evaluation report as well, we talk about what kind of accommodations or modifications a student might need so that they can connect with their core instruction or their specialized instruction. And so I'll go there next to say the IEP team then determines, does the student, are they at the level in which they need specialized instruction that they can no longer access the core instruction? And I'll give you a good example. So if we have a student that is reading, possibly at the first grade level, that student would probably struggle in a ninth grade reading class, typically, if the rest of the kids are reading at a ninth grade reading level or beyond. And so what we do is we pull that student into a specialized instruction situation in which we can teach them the skills that they are missing in order to then participate with their peers in other core classes. So we do have specialized instruction is for reading, math, and written language typically, but we also teach social skills. And then we have the other itinerant services such as DAPE, speech language, nursing services. We didn't talk about that tonight, but that also falls in that same category. And so each student has their own, they may qualify for speech services, and so then that's built into their schedule during the day as well. So every student is very unique in how they are provided the support they need to grow. Does that answer that? I'll answer your other one about the multilingual pieces. Or Beth, did you want to add anything to that?
I was only going to add that also our teachers are very unique, and they have many different areas of specialty. So we have teachers licensed. We had that slide that said teachers, right? But there's teachers with all kinds of different special education specialties within that, especially trained to meet the needs of students with varying of those 13 categories in which we qualify kids for in an individual education plan, those categorical disability areas, they have licenses to meet the needs there. And all that we do that Carol's talking about is within this spectrum, right? Trying to keep kids as close to the core as possible, but giving them what they need. And it's a partnership across the whole building. It's every staff person knowing the accommodations for that student and being able to help them wherever they move through the system.
And then to answer, Monica, your question about English language learners or multilingual learners. So a few years back, MDE had kind of warned us to say, be really careful about how you identify students that are also learning English. That doesn't mean that they necessarily have a disability. And so we were very careful. One of our school psychologists, Tyson Zitzow, has been heavily trained in that area, and he actually goes out and speaks not only to our district, but many districts around us on how to have students qualify and make sure it's a language issue. I'm sorry, it's not a language issue, but it's a disability that the student has. And so we are very careful in our assessment, in our evaluation, that we're not over-identifying students that are multilingual. Does that answer your question, Monica? Did you have any more questions?
Yeah, I do. So what I'm hearing you is that we have, so you started by saying that we have very unique students, with I believe you. So how do we serve those unique students? Because, I mean, one can say that you need one teacher for each student. So how do you serve, and because also you said that you have different specializations for everybody, how do you serve those students? And I'm guessing that has something to do with those 13 categories?
As well as our 8 settings. So there are some students, when Carol showed the slide that said levels 1, 2, and 3, and those were green. A level 1 student is a student that they're spending just about 20% of their day or less with a special education teacher. So the special education, so many of the students, remember 94% of our kids fit in there. None of them are spending, are set aside all day. Not none of them. Most of them are not set aside all day into a separate course, but are integrated throughout the day. And so there's so many factors, both in the setting of the student, what percentage of time they spend with the teacher, as well as then how are students able to work together and learn together. And so teachers work really hard to group students with similar needs and similar social needs to learn together and not work just one-on-one, but to give kids that rich learning experience with their peers. So it's both the levels 1 through 8 and the levels of the various levels of disability as well. Pretty complicated. That's why they all end up being individual education plans. It's really, there's probably no two alike of the 2,000 some that we have.
What are the settings again? 8 settings of what?
The 8 settings of the amount of time that a student is in specialized instruction for the day. You want to, the slide there. Well, don't get dizzy looking at the screen, but Carol will find that for you again. That shows way at the beginning. There you go. It's this slide, Monica, that shows the different levels that kids can be served, either under 20% or 20 to 60% or 60% of their day. And that's the majority of our students fit right there in those green categories.
So so when we have staff, when we need a staff in other areas, and Lori or Mike, you can correct me. Well, we look at the number of students and then we know and the number of teachers more or less that we need and groups like that. But you also have to consider the need of the students. And I know we always low in stuff there. But how do we know what are the, or how do you budget? Carol, how do you budget? How do you look at the beginning of the year and say, this is what I'm going to need?
Really good question. How do we budget? So, and again, complex and unique as well. And so we have a couple of different funding sources. And so we have our federal funding source and we have our state funding source. And so our federal funding source is divided up into a couple of different pots of money. And so we have our 419, our finance code 419 is what it's called. And that's kind of I don't want to say it's not a general budget, but it's the big general budget for special education. So a lot of our staff are paid for out of 419. A lot of our supplies are paid for out of 419. And then that 419 is also divided into about 15% of it is in our CEIS, our intervention funds as well. And then we also have state funds. And our state funds are directly to go to things that pay for students. And so to set a budget, we divide all of those, all of the needs. So the biggest part of our budget, what we spend, is on staff. Because of all the 13 disability areas, we have to hire staff that are qualified and licensed in all of those different areas. And so that's our challenge as we are budgeting. And so sometimes we have to look at it, we have our pie, and then we have to decide how we're going to slice that pie. And so we're going to, if we need, let's say that we see that we have several more students that are in need of occupational therapy, and that we need to hire an additional occupational therapist, then that reduction has to come someplace else. So then we have to figure out and be creative to say, where does that come from someplace else? And so that's how we work it. It's as unique as our kids are, to be honest. But Amy's brilliant, and Amy really helps me to figure out all of the different pieces that go together to make it work. So I can't take credit for most of it.
But how do you know who do you need? Like, yeah, because you have, do you know about more, do your students don't change that much and you kind of understand the needs of them and plan according to the needs of previous students?
Yeah, that's another great question. So it's based on what services are put on an IEP. And so if as a student I'll go back to occupational therapy again. If I have occupational therapy, if I'm qualified for speech therapy, if I also qualify for math services, all of those services get added up, and then we know how many teachers we need to hire in each one of those categories. So we'll know how many occupational therapists do we need to serve all of those kids who qualify for occupational therapy. How many speech language pathologists do we need to service all of those kids that qualify? And so the same goes for the academic piece. How many teachers do we need? And let's say it falls in that autism spectrum category. How many licensed teachers do we need? And because of the number of students that qualify in that category.
Okay, so I'm going to more harder questions, sorry.
Oh, I thought those were the hard ones already.
So I have a harder one.
Okay.
So along with that, so
To give the microphone to Beth. Yeah.
then I'm also guessing that the teachers or people that you need cost different according to the market or their abilities. For example, you've been talking about the speech pathologist, and I'm thinking that the speech pathologist is for a lack of a better way to put it, an expensive staff. And then you have the need for a speech pathologist, and I also think that that's not only an expensive staff, might be a hard to get one compared to the market. So how do you do with those challenges? Is that, I mean, that came to mind because you mentioned that one, but I'm pretty sure that you have those challenges with other positions within a special ed.
So all of our licensed staff, whether they be an itinerant staff, which it would be a speech pathologist, an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, they're all on a teacher's contract. So they're not earning more money or different salaries than our teachers are. They're all considered teachers for the state of Minnesota. They're all on the teacher's contract. And so the question then is, how do we get those people to apply, and how do we retain them, right? And so that is one of our challenges, to do that in those specialty positions right now, to get that. We're doing okay right now, but an example would be those speech pathologists. Because we needed 3 speech pathologists this year that we couldn't get, and we couldn't get them through an agency as either. We hired on speech language pathology assistants. And so they're helping to fill the gap to, they treat students during the day, they just don't complete evaluations. And so those are the kinds of creative things that we are doing. If need be, we would reach out to our neighboring districts. It's usually the opposite, because we're large. They usually reach out to us to say, do you have any physical therapy time that we could purchase? Or do you have any audiology time that we could purchase? But we, so far I will say we're holding steady. We do have areas that we have to recruit in a harder way, and we'll continue to do that.
Okay, my last question that I want Willie to hear me and tell me if that is not an appropriate question, and then they don't need to answer. But I want to ask them, how do they feel when they are present in the conversation about CRAP subsidy? when we talk about cross-subsidy and we talk about a deficit that we have of like 12-something millions because of a special ed. Is that an appropriate question or not?
I'll answer it, and then Carol can chime in if she'd like, but I have the answer. As the executive director for special education, as anyone that works in the special education department, anytime that the discussion starts to go towards the cross subsidy, a natural tendency would be to feel as if we are to blame, or we are the department to blame, or in other words, it's shouldering the burden. It's putting it. Now, this is my own perspective, and I want Carol to say this. Okay, so Carol, I want you to make sure that you say what you need to say. But it's that fine line, because as we say this, and we know that there's a cross subsidy, and that we know and we feel that the state needs to fund education fully. If I'm in that department, I start to feel as if I am the reason, I am the one to blame. And I'm not saying that the correct way, but as I speak to, or as I listen to that department, there's no way that they could not start to have some of those feelings. But before I finish, I would like Carol to put it in her eloquent words, and then this superintendent will hush.
Oh, thank you, Willie. I think you hit the nail on the head. Exactly. It really, I about it, to be honest. And simply because I do agree that the state has to fully fund what we're doing. But I think as the department that serves those students, we're so conscientious about keeping our pie and staying within our budgets because we don't want to create more of a cross subsidy. So we're working really hard to keep it as steady as we can and not create more. We know that it's very challenging, but I do feel that we do need to fully fund special education. And so it's just a little bit of a tug, like, okay, I need to serve kids in a really great way and support their needs and have them grow. And at the same time, I really have to work hard at maintaining the budget so we're not overspending and creating a greater cross subsidy.
Monica, I interpreted your question to be, what do the kids feel like when the question of cross subsidy is talked about in their presence? And you didn't answer that question. Maybe I heard it wrong, because I wouldn't think they would even have a discussion about that in front of kids. But was that your question, or did
That was not my question. They did answer my question.
Never mind.
Yeah, and I know the only way you can solve a problem is to talk about it, so it has to be talked about, and sometimes we talk about things that aren't so pleasant, but our viewing audience isn't too big, so. So what I was going to say is that there are certain presentations that go on every year that they're long, but there are some where I just kind of go, wow, every time I see it. One of them is special education. It's so big, it's so vast. There's so much, and like you said, every kid is individual. Every kid has individual needs, and you create an individual education plan for each one of them, and you think of the number of students, I think it was 2,500 students total, and each one of those kids is in one of those settings. And I'm not the professional here, but I'm going to say that setting 1, 2, and 3 are kids who need some extra help, but they're going to go out in the world and they're going to do just fine when they're adults if they get the help that they need. Setting 4 through 7, a whole bunch of those kids are going to be the same way. And probably just 7 and 8, you're going to have some kids who will struggle their entire life. They just have, they have physical challenges and mental challenges that they're going to face their entire life. And although they can do better with the education, like they're never going to go out and be fully functional in society as far as holding, they're not going to go out and be the executives at 3M or something like that. But when you look at the number of kids that are in special education, knowing what the special ed department does for those kids and gives them the opportunity to go out and function as adults be fully functional married adults with kids. And I mean, I know a bunch of kids that from when I went to school they were in special ed, and they're grown up and they have families and kids of their, they're doing just fine, families, jobs, everything. But one of the things with special ed is that it's an invisible program. When people look at District 742, they don't see special ed. They see 10,000 students, and of course, it's 10,000 students that are all going to, I mean, it's 10,000 students, all of the same, going to class, going to gym, going to football game at night, going to the dances, doing all of those things. And it isn't that way in reality. There's a lot of kids that are getting this special support, and thank God for it, because if not, we'd be putting 2,500 kids into our community in this, in the kids that are in school right now, just those 12 years, we'd be putting 2,500 kids out into society that weren't ready to live there. And what a drain that would be on our communities, and the problems that we'd have, the crime that we'd have, the unemployment, it would be such a burden on our community. So you have a invisible program. The invisible for part of it is statutory. You can't talk about IEPs and start telling the public that we're doing this with this student, we're doing this with this student. It has to be invisible. And yet it's so overwhelmingly complicated and broad and just overwhelming to even think about it, that and Zach, this meeting tomorrow night where you're talking about special education cross subsidy, I mean, this is it. And I don't think the legislators even understand what special education is and what you guys do and what it does for communities. I think they just see a number and special ed, and they don't think of, I mean, I'm telling you, people don't think of students in District 742 as being any different than students at Cathedral. It's the same students, we just have more. But it isn't. It is students who have challenges that they face and they need the supports. And that support is overwhelmingly difficult and challenging to provide. And when the state doesn't step up and fund it fully, it makes it even more difficult. And does create challenges and funding challenges for all students within districts. And that's why we talk about it. It's not, I mean, the last thing I'd do is look at you guys and say you're the cause of underfunding our district. It's the opposite. You guys are doing everything that you possibly can to help these kids out, and it's the state legislators that aren't stepping up. They're not funding it. The state needs to fund it and give you guys what you need to be able to do the work that you need to do, and still leave enough money in the budget so that non-special ed students can get what they deserve also. So, I mean, yeah, that's all I really have to say on that. It's a overwhelmingly large program, and the complexity of it and the uniqueness of every individual within it it's just overwhelming. I don't know how you do it.
Al, can I say thank
Yeah.
you?
Oh.
I just really want to say thank you for that. I really appreciate that a lot, your statements. And it just really speaks to the dedication and the creativity of the staff that we have in this district. And I don't just mean special education staff, because it takes a village, right? It takes everybody in the school to support kids in different ways. And we have just some brilliant, brilliant educators that when they come to me and ask questions, can I try this, Carol? Can we do this? And I'm thinking, oh, okay, I think we can. Let's figure that out. And they just are amazingly creative, from driveway drops that we've talked about, and just figuring out how to teach kids in functional skills online. It's quite amazing to watch. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. The one question that I do have, and it's just something that I was thinking about as we were talking about some of the funding and the expenses of the program, is we used to talk a lot about the maintenance of effort that was required by the state. Is that still in play, and are we still, so if you had a part of this where you're saying we're looking at doing this more efficiently and trying to find more efficient ways, but yet if you do find a way to do something more efficiently within special ed, those dollars still need to stay within special ed the next year? Is that, we can't spend less?
That's correct. And so maintenance of effort tells us that what we have spent, just like what you said, Al, what we have spent in a previous year, we need to spend that same amount. One of our challenges that we're having with the maintenance of effort is our struggle to hire non-licensed staff, because they would fall in that as well. And so we have made maintenance of effort, but every year we're thinking about how do we move things around and make sure that we make those pieces last. And if we have, so there are some ways that if we didn't spend as much as we did the year previous, so on things like if we had a student with really high specific needs, let's say that one student needed one teacher and one paraprofessional, and then that student graduated or that student left us, we would no longer be spending that money. So we could say to the state, we don't have that need anymore. Or if we graduate a very large class and the next class isn't as large, those are all things that they take into consideration. But yes, in general, we need to be spending the same amount. Good question.
Thank you.
Natalie?
So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about anxiety and depression, and how with kids that have that, either they're getting help in counseling or that they're just exhibiting signs, where does that fall in an IEP? Can you have an IEP specifically for anxiety or depression, or how do you work that into your system?
Take that one.
I'm glad to try.
Okay.
An individual education plan would be created at the point that that was an interference with the student's learning. So certainly those students that are noticed, those students who teachers report, the MTSS team would start there and say, this is what we're seeing. There are other supports within the building that you're probably familiar with that would be interventions before you would consider whether that student rises to the level of a disability and the need for those supports. But certainly that can be a factor that gets a kid services that really support them throughout their day in a more extensive way than or in addition to the other services, mental health services that are in the building.
The reason I asked about that is one of my kids is dealing with anxiety, and so besides the 2,500 students that you're showing here, they're not on that list, but they're getting so much help at school from teachers, from the counselor, talking about that same thing. Like, I don't know if we need to go to an IEP quite yet, but they talked to all the teachers, and the MTSS team so all that to say, like, my child may not be up there on that list right now, but they're still getting the services that they need. So it's even more than 2,500 students that you're serving. It's 2,501 for sure.
Natalie, you're describing actually the other half of our department, which is that student services side as well. And so on the student services side, we deal with things like the mental health components. Now, It's very gray because it can cross over into what's the category of other health disabilities. And so it's gray in that way. And so a student can be assessed if, again, like Beth mentioned, if it's interfering with their education, their anxiety or their depression is interfering with their education, and then a doctor has diagnosed the student with that, then they could potentially qualify for an IEP. But right now, we have, I think it's about, well, I'm going to say it's about 200, because I think it's about 204, actually, students that have Section 504 plans in our district as well. So those are students that have been identified as having a disability, so it may be anxiety and depression, but the Section 504 plans are not goal-driven. So we're not writing a goal for math. We're not writing a goal for reading or writing, but it supplies the accommodations for a student. So maybe the student with anxiety can come out of the classroom and take a test in another room.
That's what they're
Accommodation, yep, that would be in a Section 504 plan as well. And the counselors they head up the 504 plans.
Yes.
Yeah, good question.
Thank you. I have a follow-up of that question. So when you were saying that in Natalie's example, a student with depression, then it has to rise at the level of disability for you to do an IEP and be in that part of the program. Can students be out of it? So let's say that this kid is not depressed anymore, so you take him out of the disability?
Yes, a student can be discontinued at any point along the way with parental consent.
And how do you do with the numbers then?
Say that again?
Because you have to be counting students within your program.
Yes, and so the December 1st child count that we showed you, the 2,583 students, that's just one point in time, because the very next day on December 2nd, we might have 4 more students. And then we might have 8 students the next day that move out of the district. And so it really is just a point in time. And so for servicing students, again, just individual needs, and we keep that ballpark count always in mind for the number of teachers that we need, the number of counselors that we need, et cetera, as we go. Yeah.
I have one more question for you. You talked some about how the state is requiring recovery to be part of all of the IEPs, correct? Did I understand that right? So recovery is a part of that. And I'm wondering if have you been, I'm trying to put two things together here, but you talked about that, and then you also talked about curriculum and new materials and things, this needed materials for special education. Have we received, of the COVID funding, have we received a fairly good-sized portion of those dollars to go in and purchase those types of materials that would be related and in a manner of recovery?
So any curriculum or supplies or the cost of paying teachers, all of that can come out of those recovery funds that we received. So special education, we received about $620,000, and then early childhood special education received about $52,000. And so we're utilizing those funds to pay staff to complete the recovery processes, whether that be writing the new IEPs or holding additional meetings or providing additional services that the student needs in order to have those recovery pieces met. All of that is paid for with that funding. Mm-hmm.
Many years ago, back in when Diane Mueller was principal of Kennedy, the IEP concept was just getting started. And we had a child that we figured could use some help in mathematics. And we couldn't seem to get the school system to do this. And finally, we had to go to get an outside professional to almost write an IEP and present it to the school system. And a letter from the attorney didn't hurt either, but they took the person in, and in time she did progress and recover. Can you give me some sort of idea how things have changed over the years? Because what some you've got going now sounds really terrific. But maybe you could give a little history of how things have changed.
Sure. So IDEA came about in 1975, and so I'll keep this short. Um, So way back then, as things were initiated, IEPs were in play, evaluation reports were in play at that time, but the services weren't really developed at a level that we could really know or be effective for students. Some was, I don't want to say that it was ineffective, but it was just, as we grow, we know more about how to serve kids. And so for us now, we look across settings to say, how is a student doing? And so, for example, if a student was struggling in math, we would really determine, we'd look at their data from MCA scores, from STAR scores, and do observations in math classes, talk to those math teachers to say, how is the student doing? How is the student progressing? And so with all of that data, then we connect with parents and say, tell us what you think. Tell us how you think things are going. And then we can make some determinations whether that would be a really good assessment to move forward on or by trying interventions. So if the student needed something in math, is there an intervention that we can put in place that would catch the student up or give them some strategies that would be useful for further math knowledge? And if that works, fantastic. If that doesn't work, we would do further assessment to determine if the student really did have a disability in the math area.
Okay. What's an options 2?
That's attached to the word community. Community Options 2 is one of our programs for students who are ages 18 to 21 who had transition goals they were still working on at the time they were ending 12th grade, and their team determined that they needed some additional instruction in order to meet their goals in those areas that I talked about when I said ECHO, in employment and education, community living, home living. They still have some work to do that would best be accomplished with further instruction. And so there's, at Community Options 2, there's a morning of class session and an afternoon of on-the-job experience. There was a picture in here of a young woman serving coffee at Garvey, and so they have some work experiences around the St. Cloud State campus where they are housed so that they get that real-world work experience with a job coach.
So it's kind of like the same age group as InStep, but entirely different.
It is. It's another option for our kids. We have InStep and CO2 for those 18 to 21 with different varying needs so that they can be individualized in the way we meet those needs.
Okay. Do you have some sort of a partnership with Wacosa? Wacosa?
I don't know what about the partnership
That's
part,
okay.
but the employment part.
Yeah. And so WCOSA is typically a program that our kids can attend following the 18 to 21 program. So when they are either living independently or maybe they're still living with their parents or living in a group home, they can access WCOSA, and they do that through a job service in St. Cloud. It's called Vocational Rehab, and we partner with Vocational Rehab. So we're always planning in advance for kids. So when we look at their projection through high school, we plan for their work, their schooling. What is that going to look like? Are they going to go to college? Are they going to go to a community college, a four-year college? Are they going to go straight to work? And so then following that, we're still projecting to say, are they going to live independently? And if they're not going to be able to live independently and work independently, we need to hook them up with vocational rehab. And that's our partnership to working with WACOSA.
Okay. You said that there's a lot of summertime staff training. How is that being received by the staff spending their summers in training?
I would hesitate to say there's a lot of it. Last summer, we did pull them in. We spent a week training. They were in for half days and then some additional paid hours for some of the needs that came up that were unexpected, like the moving to the new due process system. Our new teacher academy, which is in partnership with Learning and Teaching, and certainly they can tell you more about that, those teachers do come in for extra training before the school year starts, and we try to give them a jump start on the skills that they need in knowing our students well and working within our system, knowing our curriculum, and being up and ready to go.
Okay. I recently did a tour of the Katherine Johnson building. It's going to be quite fabulous. I think we've got a really good buy on it too. And you're moving kids and programs into that building. Well, you're moving them out of other places, like Roosevelt. What's going to become of those other places?
Always something is moving. So at Roosevelt Education Center right now, we have our elementary level 4 EBD program. They will be going to Katherine Johnson. We also have our 912 level 4 EBD program. There also will be at Katherine Johnson. And we have another program there, a third program called our Journey program. And so our Journey program is set up for kids that mostly are on our autism spectrum with very specific individualized needs. And so there are up to 6 students in that program with a couple of teachers to serve those students. And they are going to stay. They will stay there at Roosevelt Education Center. And then we're looking to possibly programmatically adding a program similar with younger kids, maybe grades 4 through 8. But we're just in the development phases right now. And a lot of it depends on staffing. If we can get teachers and non-licensed staff to support a program like that, and if we have the budget to support that. And then our CAP program, which is our in-school intervention program. So instead of kids being given an out-of-school suspension, they go to our CAP program. It's called Community Accountability. And they spend 2 or 3 days there, and in which they receive their academic pieces, but also they do the restorative pieces as well before they go back to their home school. So those are the programs that will be there right now. That's the plan today.
Okay, because I know we've spent quite a bit of money remodeling the building after the fire, and I want to see that it's good, well used. It is not, but when you pull people and programs out, what's going to go into it?
I think it will be well used.
Okay, that's it.
All right. Thank you, guys. You're a very knowledgeable team.
Welcome.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Next up is a schools update presented tonight by Dr. Lori Putnam, Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education, and Dr. Mike Brevard, Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Education.
Good evening, Chair Hawes, members of the board, and Superintendent Jett. Let's see if we can get going here. This evening, Dr. Putnam and I will share updates on preschool, elementary, and secondary schools. And as usual, we will start out with our preschool friends. So in our preschool program, our youngest learners are using our wonderful campus, as we look up at the screen, at Quarry View to learn about weather and to learn about the environment. Of course, this must all start off with sledding, as we are in Minnesota. Our staff at Quarry View, including some of our custodial staff, helped with fashioning a sledding hill with a very slight little slope for our preschoolers to enjoy being outside in the snow. The children are seen in the above photos, experiencing wonderful Minnesota weather, and then they're going to bring some of this snow inside. For many of the children on the screen, this is their first time sledding down a hill in snow. So the snow came inside, and the children are seen here enjoying the snow and ice inside and experimenting with how long it takes for snow to melt, how long the snow stays cold, and deciding whether snow can even stay warm at all. And if you look up in the picture, you can see that the children are using eyedroppers to try and melt the ice down. Using the eyedropper for kids this age does help with the children's finger muscles, and they're going to be using that fine motor skill as they prepare to become excellent writers in the future. And being in Minnesota, we could not forget about ice fishing. So our youngest students are also practicing some of their ice fishing skills indoors. As you can see, they are learning how to work as a team as they try to catch their fish. And if I could get close enough up to the two little girls, it looks like they're real fish. They're not real fish, just so everyone knows. We don't have the 4-year-olds working with little sunnies or minnows inside of our buildings. As we move into February, we are into our annual One District, One Book, and our first reveal of what that book is took place this past Saturday at Shields. Children and families attended this event together, and we are so fortunate to have our partner in this wonderful work during the month of February, where our elementary schools are reading together, and we want to especially thank our friends at Shield for hosting this partnership on Saturday. So what was the book? Our One District, One Book for 2002 is Nuts to You. This is a funny and moving illustrated novel by Newbery medalist Lynn Ray Perkins about two squirrels going very far to save a friend who was snatched up by a hawk. A crisis occurs when the gray squirrel Jed is swept up by a hawk, and his friends rush to find out where he's landed. But on the way, they run into many different dangers, and the adventures just continue to ensue. So we'll see our kids at the elementary level reading at least a chapter a week, probably more like a chapter every 2 days as we get through the content of this book. I could not help but share some of the pictures of our fabulous elementary teaching staff who are donning their squirrel suits during the last few days of school as they introduce the book to kids who may not have made it to Shields on Saturday, and just having a great time engaging kids in that kind of fun. So in even thinking about reading, as I look at our elementary schools, this here is our Pizza with the Principals at Discovery, and even that has a reading component. The kids were having pizza that day because they had earned it as being a student of the month with the principals. So here you see Principal Estrada and Assistant Principal Holm. They can't let the opportunity of not being able to read to kids pass them by. And as you look across these children who are enjoying their pizza, they are all captive audiences from grades 1st grade to about 3rd grade, I think, on that right-hand side, as our principals move around reading to our children during a fun lunchtime. More reading. At Kennedy and Madison, our students are incredibly excited to be checking out books to read. And what we see up here with these pictures are achievement awards that are given out to kids, to our students who are meeting their weekly goals for their reading minutes at home. So you have some happy students getting their achievement awards and certificates. And all of this reading makes for great writers. This past month and a half ago, our United Way of Central Minnesota invited all 5th grade students in District 742 to tell us how they live united. Whether it's helping out a neighbor or donating old toys, 5th graders had to describe in 100 words or less how they've made a difference in Central Minnesota. Prizes were pretty good. Prizes were $200 for our first place winner and $75 for 14 runner-up winners. So that is what has been happening with our fabulous preschool and elementary kids during January. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Putnam.
Thank you, Dr. Rivard. I have to tell you that he came a little sheepish to my office to let me know just how very adorable his presentation was tonight with all those little 4th graders, 4-year-olds ice fishing. I said, it's okay. It's okay. We'll do our best to stand up to that. So glad to be able to share a little bit of what's happening in our secondaries and activities. Thanks to a generous grant from CMLE, which is the Central Minnesota Libraries Exchange, North Junior High students will be able to check out a book about drawing graphic novels and receive art supplies, including a sketchbook and a blank book with which to create their own graphic novel. The student-created novels will be added to the library collection at school for other students to check out and read. Media specialist Mary Shadrick noticed a growing interest in manga, a specific form of graphic novel that originated in Japan, and other graphic novels among students at North. Many students watch anime, which is the cartoon format based on manga novels, and many also draw the characters. This great opportunity was a chance for students to move from consumers to creators. And the hope is to add more books and supplies each year, and it would be amazing. Their dream is to have a section at the North Library, which is a collection of simply created, student-created materials. We are excited to share that Harmony Treetop, who is a McKinley artist, won the contest to have her artwork displayed at the state capitol. Hers was the winning entry out of all of District 14. Pictured here is her winning entry, so the photo on the left, and then you can see her receiving an award with Principal Stiniger and Assistant Principal Chikolis. Here we have a little video to show you of our 6th grade students from North, Kennedy, and South who are part of our 6th grade winter sports sampler. They went to Riverside Park to ski with the Crush Varsity Nordic ski teams. The varsity teams did team building drills with the 6th graders, including pulling them from behind with poles, which you will see shortly. Also adorable. And the varsity team skied with the 6th graders around the course. The Crush team provided support and encouragement, and they finished the day by drinking hot chocolate in front of a fire from the shelter.
Your mark. Hey, 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 on your mark. Yes, yes, go.
A grand time was had by all. 2 instrumentalists were nominated or are going to state from Apollo. They'll be playing in their ensemble's concert in the Minneapolis Convention Center on February 19 at the MMEA Clinic. And if we can all please wish Senior Lily Weitzel, who plays the viola, and Senior Kellen Hansick-Brill, who plays the oboe, good luck at their upcoming event. Here you can see some of our students who are putting service above self. On the left, you can see some students from the National Honor Society. This is a student from Tech who is helping at that Saturday event at the One District One Book Reveal at Shields, which is a nice way to loop that into be a K-12 happening. The Tech's National Honor Society students also collected hundreds of socks to cap off their January Simply Socks drive. When they worked with some of our homeless shelters, some of the most needed items are underwear and socks. So they decided to collect socks for our community to give back. And then on the far right, you can see students from Tech and Apollo who are bagging food for Kids Against Hunger. Today was National Signing Day. So we're going to talk a little bit. I just want to feature that from Apollo and Tech. At Apollo, for National Signing Day, we had 11 athletes sign letters of commitment to compete at the college level. We welcomed parents, gave coaches an opportunity to highlight memories and achievement of each athlete. And speaking of socks, AD Badger presented the athletes with socks in their college color. The metaphor being was that they currently have feet planted in 2 different worlds, both high school and college, and the socks are to keep their feet warm and cozy as they make their transition. So I want to say a quick congratulations to Jada Hansen, Bethany Knopp, Libby Lommel, Brooke Verkenes, Nicole Hackenmuller, Landon Othot, Kaylee Davidson, Andrew Collars, Patrick Naoa, and Aubrey Priestler. And then Tech's signing day was also today, and we have a special guest who will be congratulating the folks from Tech.
This message is for Henry, Andrew, Sarah, Andrew, John, and Brooke. Congratulations. Your hard work, your commitment, and your dedication. And please don't forget that support from your family and friends, it got you to this moment. You have earned it, and you deserve it. So now enjoy the moment and the entire journey ahead. As superintendent, I am totally happy for you and just thrilled. And the entire 742 community is proud of you. Again, congratulations and enjoy.
So some exciting things happening at our secondaries. We welcome any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna rock some first readings on policies here. First up, we have Revised Board Policy 602, Organization of School Calendar and School Day. First reading presented by Dr. Mike Rivard, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education.
Good evening, Chair Haas, Superintendent Jett, and members of the board. We have two policies that I'm going to go over. The first policy is Board Policy 602, which is about our school calendar development and school day development. The purpose this policy is to provide timely determination of our school calendar, and it must be adopted annually. So this policy has been in place and was reviewed last in 2018, and at that time, no changes were recommended. As we review the policy, we are not recommending any changes for sections 1, 2, 3, or 4. However, when you get into section 4, there is an addition regarding e-learning days. E-learning days are part of the 2017 Minnesota legislature, and they enacted the use of e-learning days at that time. So the language that you're seeing here for section 5 is directly related to that and has been adopted for the very most part from our MSBA's model policies. So I can quickly just go through and share with you that each of the subparts here. So for A, we know that they're saying that an e-learning day must offer access for online instruction in the event of inclement weather. B says that a school district can only use up to 5 e-learning days in one school year. C, an e-learning day is counted as a day of instruction and included in the hours of section 3 above, which talks about your total number of hours that you would have within a school year. Let's see if I can scroll down here a little bit. D talks about the fact that the school district will include accommodations for students without internet access at home and for digital devices for access for families without technology or with insufficient amount of technology for the number of District 74 students that live in that household. E talks about the need for us to notify parents and staff about e-learning day plans at the beginning of each school year. F talks about that we must look to make notice to parents at least 2 hours prior to the normal school start time that would happen if we were to have an e-learning day. And on e-learning days, students, teachers must be accessible both online and by telephone during their normal school hours. Again, as I mentioned, this is new from 2017 as that statute that's highlighted is related to e-learning days. At this point in time, this is the recommendation of the administration, and we'll be looking for any questions you may have.
Scott?
Yeah, they're talking about technology to make this all possible. Do we have it in place?
We do. The technology that they're speaking of right now would be related to hotspots, and those things we have, and we've prepared to give out up to almost 500 that we've had last year during our Distance Learning Academy time. Families would come and check those out from core review, so we are prepared to address that issue if it were to come up again.
The 2-hour notice to parents, it didn't seem like very much time, but I suppose they'd be sleeping otherwise.
Those inclement weather days, Superintendent Jett makes every effort to try to make those notices out prior to 8 o'clock the evening before. And that's been my experience, especially this year, that we've been able to work on accomplishing that. But obviously, 2 hours is what the statute's asking and what the policy would say. But we know that things could happen where we might not be able to make it to that policy every time.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Then rolling into proposed revised board policy 612.1, development of parent and family engagement policies for Title I programs. First reading.
Board Policy 612.1 is our policy on the development of parent engagement for Title I programs, and it was last reviewed in 2019 with no changes. This evening, I'm coming to you with significant number of changes, but they're directly related to some of the language that you're seeing and not necessarily how the content would be enacted in the school level. So the administration at this time is recommending changes that will align with the language of District 742's policy to better align with MSBA's model policy. And what does that mean? The majority of the changes noted in the proposed revision is changing the language from being a policy about parent engagement, and now we would have it include family engagement. So it's a lot of changing some of the wording of how we had the policy as a District 742 policy 4 to 5 years ago, and now adopting the model policy. Some additional changes or revisions that we are recommended. You'll note in section 1, in the purpose, we have been asked to add what does Title I talk about, or what is Title I. So within the purpose statement, this is different than what you would see in the MSBA policy. We have described what Title I is. In section 2, as you go down to our general statement of policy, what you're seeing there is just some changing in the wording and crossing out it is the policy of District 742 and changing it with the policy of the school district. Again, that's just to be reflective of MSBA's reading. Section 3, we have some striking out of the striking out of section D, as the language was not included here in the MSBA policy. However, the language of what's encapsulated in there about who we partner with is seen in paragraph C that's directly above and talks about local laws and local programs. So previously in our District 742 policy, we cited some specific organizations or agencies in D. We're proposing to strike that out and just follow MSBA's language and talk about just local programs as being what we would be working with. Section D, as you see above, the green is going to be so that the language is exactly as MSBA's reads. And that speaks to how we make every effort and meet that effort of presenting information to people in multiple languages, so that we can make sure that we're assisting their families and that the strategies are something that's understandable to them. Section E is simply adding the word evidence-based, again located in the MSBA policy. The rest of the language of E was straight from the policy as it stands right now. As is the case with letter G, we're changing the word from parents to include all families. If we get down into section 4, development of the school level policy, the language in green is currently not part of our policy, but is included in MSBA's model policy, as we spoke about above. Section A3, as we move down, is rewording to include more precise language about the review and the improvement of the family involvement. So again, the language that was in there before from 4 years ago did not match MSBA's policy language. As we get down into number 4, we did not include in our previous policy an explanation of the curriculum that we use for Title I, the form of the academic assessment, and the achievement of state academic standards. The thing is that we were doing that, we just don't have it in the policy. So it was something that we were already doing at the building level, we just did not have it included in the policy as it stood. Same thing that you're seeing for number 2 here is that language of monitoring school attendance, homework, and monitoring television watching is language that you'd only see in District 742 policy. It was not part of MSBA's model policy and wasn't something necessarily that we would be doing anyway, and it's not required by the statute. So the language that you see up there right now does match MSBA's and fits better into what we would do with our families and with their parents. Section 3B, you just see a grammatical error and moving the word "and" to the proper place. And then the addition of an expectation of ensuring regular two-way meaningful communication between family members and staff. And to the extent practicable, and for our district, it is all the time, we do this with the language that is the first language for family members. Moving down, you see that again, we have a spot where we cited certain programs within our community, and instead we want to say that we're doing this with all federal, state, and local programs, and not limiting ourselves to who we would work with. And then as you get down to number 4 and number 5, again, I think we just have some language here that's, we want to be more precise in matching MSBA's language. And then as we finish off a very lengthy policy, E did not encapsulate everything that we saw in MSBA's. And what E does is E looks at it as a comprehensive statement of how we carry out the requirements of the policy. And we were somewhat limiting ourselves in how the policy was written previously. So administration's recommendation would be to change and adopt the MSBA's policy along with changing some of the wording of F. That concludes 612.1 for its first reading. Was there any questions?
Scott?
Yes, in 3D, there seems to be a crossing out some pretty specific stuff. Is that the purpose?
The purpose of that piece is that if you go right above, Scott, to C, in the last sentence there, with other relevant federal, state, and local laws and programs. So the programs that they're mentioning, D gets very specific, whereas in the paragraph titled C actually encapsulates all of those other programs. So instead of having specificity in the D paragraph, we're actually covered just by having it in C. That's the recommendation.
Is this what we want to do, to drop that specificity out of there?
It does open up our ability to work with many different programs. It will not limit us in any way.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have proposed revised board policy 603, first reading. This is curriculum development, presented by Lori Posch, Executive Director of Learning and Teaching.
Good evening, Chair Haas, Superintendent Jett, and members of the school board. Oops, Michael, you went back on. I'm a little jealous that Drs. Rivard and Putnam got to share the fun parts of learning and teaching, and I'm here to give you 4 policies tonight. You did too, I'm doing 4. Okay, let's get this back on. No, that's fine. Come pretty quickly. So the first policy we're going to look at together tonight is policy 603, which is curriculum development. I'm going to enlarge it. What you have attached should show the notes, but I want to make this large enough for you to be able to see. The first change in this policy comes in section 3, where it talks about responsibility. A few years ago, we had removed some of the procedural pieces from most of our policies. When you look at this part, this was rewritten to include both portions of our current policy to more closely match MSBA, and to also remove those procedural pieces that are located in administrative handbooks so that we still have some place. The other piece that's important to note in this change is that it also indicates that our process is ongoing, it's collaborative, and it's inclusive of input from multiple stakeholders. So that's the biggest piece in here. We don't want to lose that. The next change, and this is all of these details of the curriculum review in those procedural handbooks. So we have this all kept, just doesn't need to be in a policy. And I can give you an example. When changes have to be made for one reason or another, the example being our elementary reading program this year, in order for us to have made that change, we would have actually, probably should have, come back and changed the policy rather than just notifying you and talking about the need to implement a new reading program with the input of teachers. So just want you to know that the procedural parts allow us to make some changes, always keeping you notified of those changes, but not having to come back and change all of the different phases in an actual policy. In section, or in letter B, on this one, we have put in, we've taken out at the request of the superintendent, because it's something that we do. We provide, we have our district advisory committee provide that assistance. So not specifically at the request of the superintendent, it just happens. It's what we do. It ensures, again, that curriculum advisory committee is involved in the process. In number 6, and a lot of the parts in here come not just from MSBA, but also from some state statutes and from MDE. This one we looked at real closely, and what we wanted to add in here was that every child in our district who begins kindergarten in our district will be reading at or above grade level, no later than the end of grade 3. So what this does is it acknowledges that we have many, many students entering our district at different places, and we want to make sure that we're ensuring that they all are reading and are all getting to grade level. But we know that if they don't start kindergarten with us, there is a chance that we may not be able to have them at grade level by 3rd grade, but that's always our goal. In number 8, in MSBA, it added the word applicable requirements in here, and also federal law. So we wanted to make sure that we had both of those called out in our policy as well. Number 11 is a spelling mistake that went through many years of not being caught. In F, these additions are based both, again, on state statute and on MSBA model policy. And you have seen this wording many times over the last couple of years. This is where it talks about dyslexia. And you have heard from many people about the great efforts that our district is making in this area. But this is now part of MSBA policy, so we added into our policy as well. And G talks about students who do not meet or exceed on the MCAs have the ability to attend our public school system for free, and that is available for any resident under the age of 21. So this is putting that right into policy. Again, it's in MSBA, and that students under the student's plan will continue while the student is enrolled. So students who don't graduate by the time they are 17 or 18 can stay in our school system free. Any questions about the changes recommended in this policy?
Scott?
Not so much about the changes, but is dyslexia part of special ed?
It's part of what Carol talked about, the student services
Yes.
half, so it falls
Oh,
under the
Different
student
part of
services.
special ed.
Correct. It's aligned closely with the special education statute, but it falls in the student services portion.
Okay, next policy, proposed revised board policy 606, textbooks and instructional materials, first reading.
Okay, this one doesn't have very much for you to look at. The first one is several years ago, the name of our department changed from teaching and learning to learning and teaching. And some of you might remember when that happened, that we want to always put learning first, and that's the learning of our students and our adults. So that's a simple change in the name of the department. And again, in C, changing it from the teaching and learning to the executive director of learning and teaching. Second change in there, provide the opportunity for, so such procedures and guidelines, what it had said in the past was that shall provide opportunity for input and consideration of the views of students, parents, and other interested members, and we changed that to say that we will actively seek input. So the difference in that is instead of just putting it on the website that we want input, it would be actively seeking, finding people to join our advisory committees, to join our review committees, and doing that in a more proactive way. In A, this is to be consistent with our other policies. We added the superintendent, we added or designee in both A and B. And then in B, we added a statement that says the superintendent shall inform board members of all formal requests for reconsideration. And let me go back up and talk a little bit about that. So what B is talking about is if we have a parent or a community member who wants us to review any of our resources or makes a recommendation that they would like a change in those, we have a procedure in place that allows parents and community members to do that. The procedure starts at the building level with the principal and the teacher, and then comes, if that doesn't satisfy and answer the questions, it comes to our district office and usually our department. Typically, we're able to answer all of the questions that a parent would have or a community member would have, but there is an option for them to put in a formal request asking us to reconsider the materials that we're using. So the piece that we added in is that we would inform the board members of any of those formal requests so that you're aware of any formal requests that we get, and that we will keep a record of all reconsideration requests for 3 years so that we can really monitor if more than one formal request comes in about an instructional material, that we have that documented and we have that so we can watch and monitor that. Any questions about the recommended changes in this policy?
I had a question. You said you were talking about advisory committees. Who makes up the advisory committees? How are the advisory committees chosen, et cetera, et cetera? Tell me about advisory committees.
So we have a Learning and Teaching World's Best Workforce Advisory Committee, and that's required by statute. Our advisory committee statute says that it needs to meet, I think it's 3 times a year. We typically meet at least every other month. We've had a couple of meetings canceled this year with some of the COVID restrictions. It's made up of parent reps, community reps, building level teachers and administrators. Typically, what's happened is the committee members are talked to, are recruited at the building level, but that's something that we want to, continue to have the building input on, but to be able to reach out a little bit more actively, and you heard that word actively earlier, to make our committee more diverse. We have community members in the past who have served our business community. We have university members on there. So our committee starts out at the beginning of the year as usually a pretty large committee, and then it unfortunately dwindles throughout the year. So our goal is to make it a real active, diverse committee, and that's our goal for that.
Okay, I know in community ed, they have a statutory required committee, and they seem to recruit actively. But your committees I hadn't heard of before.
It's existed for a long time. It's changed names a couple of times. It was originally called the Curriculum Advisory Committee, but we wanted it to be more broad than that. So we have some parents, some community members who have been on. This is going on my 10th year. We have some members who've been on it since I started here. I think one of the things that happens, I think there's probably people that haven't heard of the community ed one too. So part of it is the interest area of people. I know that we have people who call every year to inquire about when are we going to start, and I still want to be on it. So, I know that we do have a lot of community members who are aware of it, but we are, like I said, trying to actively recruit. It tends to be a committee that a lot of people don't understand some of the curriculum pieces and some of the more in-depth happenings of what happens with learning and teaching. So we do a lot of teaching on our committee. We do a lot of some of the presentations that you see here go through the committee because we need our committee members to be informed and for them to be able to give us suggestions and advice.
In community ed, we have a board member actively assigned to the committee. Is this something that would be good or bad
There's a
for your committees?
There's a board member who attends.
Is there?
Yep.
Okay.
Sometimes they had pizza too.
Yep, we're looking forward to being in person again, to have meals.
Al?
You've been coming to those.
Oh, sorry. Will you do your microphone though?
Hopefully I'm in the right section, on selection of textbooks and other instructional materials. How much involvement do you want, or do we actually have as a board in that activity, in textbook selection?
I
Two
don't.
questions, I guess.
Yeah. In the past, I'd say the board hasn't necessarily been actively involved in the process of the selection. We've always brought the choice forward. We have many different groups that serve on the textbook selection committees. So there are community members on it. There's parents on at different stages of that selection committee. But you are always welcome to, and I know Al and I have talked about that too, you're always welcome to see what's being considered. When we have our math presentation in a few weeks, we're going to talk to you about the ones that we're considering for math so that you're able to see and hear those. But always welcome to know what we're looking at, what we're reviewing, the process that we go through.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think with COVID, you haven't done any for a little while, but it seems to me like you've always brought, generally there's at least two different books or two different curriculum that you're piloting.
Yep.
And
Yep.
that almost always comes to the board in the form of a work session or during a board meeting for the piloting session. And then a year later, you come forward with a recommendation.
Correct.
And we have to either approve or disapprove of that. I was just going to make a comment on selecting committees too. And one of the things, when we say actively seeking, and when it comes through the schools and things, I always get a little bit worried that we cherry pick people that we feel comfortable with. And it seems like the hardest thing to do is to get the people who aren't there actively seeking. They're not members of the PTA. They're not people that are actively involved so much, but they're vocal or have their voices are out in the community, but they're not being heard because they're not in, and they don't know about the curriculum committee, or they don't know about the community ed committee or whatever. And it's like, how do you get those people informed? And I don't want to force them to be on the committee, but if they're going to be vocal and critical of committees or selections, then really they should be given an opportunity somewhere to be a part of that committee. And we should welcome, especially if they are of an opposite viewpoint or something, we should welcome that viewpoint so that we can understand fully both sides of why we should or shouldn't use a particular curriculum. And I think, well, I'm almost positive that in many cases, the people who are somewhat antagonistic would be very surprised at how little they actually can affect what a curriculum is. I mean, a lot of it is determined at the national level, and they bring it to the publishers, and you get choice A or B, and they both are written to meet the same standards, so a lot of the same items are in those books. But it's seeking out, you know, when we say we actively seek, I'm always like, we need to actively seek all points of view and listen to all people and make informed decisions from what we're hearing. And
I have
not,
2 follow-ups to that for you. The first one is, I agree. And anytime I have a parent or a community member call, I invite them to join our committee. So I have kept lists of people who have said, when you look at a certain content, you know, let me know. What's interesting is I haven't had any of them follow up and attend a meeting, even after I've reached out to tell them we're doing it. But the second thing I can say, with all respect to our committee members, our committee is not an easy committee. They do challenge and they do question, and we have some very knowledgeable people, and we have people who maybe don't know the education system who really speak out. So over the years, that's one of my favorite pieces, is that they are a group that is not afraid to question and challenge, and I love that about them.
one thing I'll say is that you may not, you probably do realize it, but when you reach out to someone and you invite them and they don't come, that doesn't mean that it was an ineffective contact, because the fact that you reached out, they're not coming becomes their choice then, they didn't let me come. They were keeping me out of the process. I didn't go.
Yeah, and I really welcome anybody to come and join. We're here to serve our community as we serve our students.
Okay, next up, we have proposed revised board policy 610, field trips, first reading.
Okay, this one also does not have a lot of changes in it. As we were reviewing this, and Gary reviewed sections of this with me, because in this first general statement of policy, we had a statement, 2 sentences, that were not an MSBA policy. And as Gary and I talked, we weren't really sure how or why this was added into our purpose. So what it says is that transportation shall be furnished through a commercial carrier or school-owned vehicle, which is true. And then the next sentence says, in the event a private vehicle is approved for use, a certificate of insurance must be on file in the school district office. I want you to hold that thought, because when we go down into, I thought I had it highlighted, sorry. When we go down in section 3E, if I remember correctly. Sorry, I'm going to make you sick by scrolling. 3E, there we are. Down here it says an employee must not use a personal vehicle to transport one or more students for purposes of a field trip. So we removed that statement up in the purpose because we do not allow our staff to transport students. What it does say in here is that, you know, there may be an unforeseen situation where a student becomes ill. It also talks about sometimes a personal vehicle may have to be used, but when that's used, it's used to transport items. So an example I can give you is when I was teaching, we had a field trip and the bus was full and there were several teachers and parents and there was no room for the lunches. And one of our staff members had to drive their own vehicle and transport the buses. So in situations like that, a personal vehicle may be used, but not to transport students.
Just my memory's failing me, I think. I thought we had talked about this related to, unless the definition of field trip is different than sporting activities.
It is.
Al?
And we've already talked about this, but would it be anything to do with a parent can transport a student, correct? On a
Correct.
field trip. They can, a parent can transport their own child on a field
Correct.
trip. But what about a non-custodial, so a parent transporting other students, so not their own kids, but a non-custodial student?
I'm
Would
gonna,
that be in there for that purpose? Because this only talks about an employee.
I'm kind of looking to Tracy and Gary for that one. I don't know of a situation where we would ever allow a parent during the day to transport other students. And I know of a couple situations where we've actually discouraged parents from taking their own child, where we've had the child ride the bus and the parent has followed. Am I correct? Questions? Other
Monica?
questions? It's not in a policy that I know of.
Yeah, should that be a recommendation to include that part in the policy? I mean, I don't know if you have had any issues, but if that is a practice, shouldn't just that be part of the policy?
I'm looking to our assistant superintendents and
I think my experience has been when the child is with me as a young child especially, the school district has care, custody, and control of that child, and I wouldn't be able to relinquish that over to another parent to transport the child, would be my take on how I would look at it, especially for a child under the age of 12. I don't know if that answers your question.
You would have to relinquish to the parent, but not to another student.
Yeah, forgive me, I thought the question was related to if another parent wanted to transport someone else's child. And to that, as an administrator, I wouldn't release that child to the other parent to transport them.
I like that to be explicit in the policy, if we can add it.
yeah, well, I'll work with Tracy on that if that's okay for some of the wording. Okay.
Okay, last up then, proposed revised board policy 613, graduation requirements, first reading.
So an interesting thing about this policy, if you remember, we had kind of put this one on hold a couple of times because MSBA had not changed their recommendations based on new changes in law and wording. They still have not, so we went ahead and made the changes anyway. You're going to see throughout here in a lot of MSBA policy and even on MDE's site, they still have the wording that says all students entering grade 8 in the 2012-2013 school year and later. And we struck that from every place in this policy because all of those students have graduated. So that date is no longer important or relevant in here. As we scroll down, another change is that it still talks about GRAD being the graduation required assessment for diploma. That no longer exists. There is not a graduation assessment. And this one, actually, they did remove from the definition part of the MSBA model policy. Going down a little further, this one is the date again. And then there were quite a few changes in A, B. Just going to kind of scroll it as we look at these. Of course, I have a pop-up come up. When we look at this section, in A, it says encouragement to participate on a nationally normed college entrance exam in grade 11 or grade 12. And although we do encourage this for our students, this is not a graduation requirement and it's not included in MSBA policy. So we thought that was kind of not the place for us to talk about what we encourage because we do that. In B, it talks about achievement and career and college readiness tests And again, there are no longer those achievement tests at the state level that are required for graduation. So all of B talks about those old requirements that were in place that are no longer in existence. And then we did a rewrite in A where it's talking about the achievement in career and college readiness. This, if you remember when we first sent it out, was a really long run-on sentence. So worked with some of you to redo the wording of that, and we have rewritten it from MSBA's policy for clarity. So instead of it being a long run-on sentence, it now is split into sections to hopefully make that one more clear. So you see all of that yellow? That was one sentence. And then we re-lettered with the removal of the current A. And in C, again, we removed a date because we are past that date. And I changed this to say 1. It had said an Algebra 1 credit, so it changed that to make sure that it says 1 Algebra 1 credit. And I think that is it. Nope, one more. This one actually was labeled as E in the current policy, so there was no D. So re-lettered that to make it D. Oh, one more, early graduation. In this one, it's talking about the principal or designee having an interview with a student and the parent or guardian. We added in the parent or guardian if the student is under 18, because if a student is older than 18, the parent and guardian are not required to be there. And then instead of saying available in post-secondary education, you know that we've been talking all along about all of the different post-secondary options that are available for our students. So we want to make sure that our parents and our students are aware of all of those different post-secondary options as they decide whether or not to do early graduation. Any questions in this one?
Al, do you have a
comment? You made the comment that MSBA hasn't really revised this yet, and I made the comment back to you that you should send this to MSBA, and I would just send them and say that we've tackled it, because we have made several changes to policies in this district that MSBA has actually picked up and used.
I will do that. Thank you.
I think it would be good and a positive thing.
I'll send that on.
Maybe get some of our fees back.
Okay, well, you didn't win the cute, adorable presentation award tonight, but you did win time efficiency, so thank you.
I'll take that.
You rocked that.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, meeting is adjourned. It is 9:49 p.m. Thank you for watching. We'll be back Wednesday, February 16th. Have a good night.
Yes.